Hello, my friend. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, welcome. Welcome to this quiet corner of the night, where the stories are slow and the world outside grows very, very distant. My name is Alan, and tonight I want to take you somewhere extraordinary. I want to take you to a place that no longer exists. Not exactly. Not in the way it once did. But if you close your eyes, and you can close them now, whenever you feel ready, if you close your eyes and simply breathe, I think you'll find it. I think you'll recognize it, because some places don't disappear entirely. Some places leave a kind of warmth in the world, like the way a hearthstone stays warm long after the fire has been banked for the night. Breathe in slowly and breathe out. Good. Tonight we are going to a monastery, a real one, a stone one, set somewhere in the green hills of 12th century England, where the air is clean and cold and smells faintly of rain and old earth. The year is somewhere around 1160, or perhaps a little later. It doesn't matter too precisely, because we are not in a hurry tonight. We are never in a hurry here. The sun has already set. The world outside the monastery walls, the muddy lanes, the distant village fires, the farmers already asleep in their low timber houses, that world has gone quiet. And behind these thick limestone walls, something even quieter is beginning. You're safe here, completely safe. Nothing from that other world can reach you tonight. Take another breath. I want you to imagine the smell first, because smell is the sense that carries us most gently. There is beeswax, warm, slightly sweet, with something almost like honey underneath it. Dozens of candles burn in iron holders along the stone passageway we are walking. Their flames are very small and very steady, because the air inside these walls is still. No draught, no wind, just the soft, continuous breathing of candlelight. Beneath the beeswax there is cold stone, limestone mostly pale grey, a little damp, carrying the faint mineral memory of the earth it was cut from. The walls here are thick, 4 feet thick in places, 5 feet in the oldest sections, near the choir. When you press your palm flat against the stone, and our monk does this sometimes, almost without thinking, it feels like pressing your hand against something immeasurably patient, something that has been here a very long time and plans to stay. There is also incense, not heavy, not overwhelming, just a ghost of it, drifting up from the choir, where Vespers was sung 2 hours ago, and where Compline is about to begin. It's the kind of smell that makes the body soften a little, the kind of smell that says, this is a place set apart. This is a place where something careful is being tended. And there are sounds, soft ones, the shuffle of wool slippers on flagstone. Kate, Kate, D, the very quiet murmur of a single voice, somewhere nearby, reciting something from memory, a psalm perhaps, or a line of scripture, moving across the lips like water over smooth river pebbles. The distant, crystalline sound of a small bell, not urgent, not alarming, just a gentle silver sound that says, it is time, come. It is time for the last prayer of the day. That bell, I find it one of the most beautiful sounds I can imagine. A single bell in a stone building, in the middle of an English night, calling a small community of men away from their work and their reading and their thoughts, calling them towards something still and shared and old. That bell has been rung every night for decades in this place. It will be rung every night for centuries more. Long after the men who ring it are gone, the sound will still be moving through the air in one form or another. What stays with me, thinking about that bell, is the way it must have felt to hear it, not as an interruption, but as an arrival, the signal that the day had done its work, and now something else could begin, something softer, something that belonged to the night. You're warm, my friend. You're perfectly comfortable wherever you are right now. Let your body settle a little deeper into the surface beneath you. Let your shoulders drop. Let the sounds of wherever you are, whatever small sounds exist around you, let them become part of this world. Let them be the sounds of the cloister, the sounds of the stone corridor, the sounds of a world that is very gently, very deliberately going to sleep. The bell is ringing. It's time for compline. Come with me. There is a particular quality to the air inside a monastery at this hour. Not quite night, not quite day. Something in between a threshold moment, tender and unhurried, where the last of the evening's warmth is still present, just barely, like the final note of a hymn that has already been sung but hasn't quite finished dissolving into the silence around it. The bell has stopped ringing, and in its absence, something opens up. Our monk, we'll simply call him Brother Thomas, though he might have been called William, or Edmund, or John, or any name that a boy born in England in the 1130s might have been given. Brother Thomas is walking now, slowly, deliberately. The way a man walks when he has nowhere else to be, and nothing more important to do, and when the act of walking itself is a kind of prayer. His feet are bare against the flagstones. This is worth noticing. In the warmer months, many monks walk the cloister without shoes, not as a hardship, but as a practice, a way of staying connected to the ground beneath them. The stone is cool under his feet, smooth in the places worn by generations of feet before his, slightly rougher near the edges where the traffic was lighter. He knows this floor the way you know the inside of your own home instinctively, without looking with the whole body. He has been at this monastery for 11 years now. He came here as a man already past 30, which was not uncommon. He had worked before with his hands, in a trade, and he carried that life quietly inside him the way a river carries silt from distant hills. He did not leave his former life because it was hard. He left it because one evening, passing a church in a town whose name he barely remembers now, he heard a group of monks singing vespers, and something in him went perfectly still, and he understood not with his mind exactly, but with something deeper than his mind that this was where he belonged. 11 years. He knows the smell of every season in this cloister. He knows which stones are coldest in January and which corner of the herb garden catches the first morning light in April. He knows the particular creak of the dormitory stairs, third step from the top, and he knows the way the choir sounds during a snowfall somehow rounder, somehow more enclosed, as though the snow wraps the whole building in something soft. Tonight, he walks toward Compline. The cloister garden is to his left, a small square of darkness and cool air, with a stone path running through it and a few herbs that survived into autumn, still holding their shapes against the sky. Above the garden, stars are beginning to show, not many yet. Just the first, brightest ones, pushing through the deep blue of the evening like tiny, steady flames. He doesn't rush to look at them. He notices them the way you notice a friend who has just entered the room with quiet gladness without making a fuss. Around him, other brothers are converging on the church from different directions. From the scriptorium, where the copyists have set down their quills for the night. From the warming room, where someone had been sitting by the last of the fire. From the infirmary corridor, moving a little more slowly, all of them moving toward the same door, the same light, the same sound that is about to begin. No one speaks. The rule of St. Benedict, the set of principles by which this community lives, written in the 6th century by Benedict of Nursia, and followed in this monastery as faithfully as breath. The rule says that the hour before Compline should be given to quiet reading, and that monks should go to the night office in silence, without unnecessary speech. And they do. They really do. It is not a strained silence, not a held-breath silence. It is the silence of people who have chosen this life, who have practiced this silence for years, who have come to understand that some of the most important things that happen inside a person happen in the spaces between words. The door to the church stands open. Beyond it, candlelight, warm and still and waiting. Brother Thomas steps through the doorway, and the night truly begins. The church receives him the way it always does, with a coolness, and a stillness, and a quality of light that seems to belong to no particular century. Brother Thomas pauses just inside the doorway, just for a moment. He does this every night, and he is not entirely sure why. Perhaps it is simply the body's way of acknowledging a threshold, of registering that something has shifted, that the world of corridors and tasks and quiet movement has given way to something else, something more deliberate, more tender, more concentrated in its purpose. The choir stretches ahead of him. 2 rows of carved wooden stalls running along either side of the nave, facing each other across a narrow central aisle of pale stone. The stalls are simple dark oak, worn smooth along the armrests, slightly creaky in a few places, familiar as old furniture in a beloved room. Each monk has his own place, has had it for years. Brother Thomas's stall is on the north side, third from the end, nearest the pillar. He could find it blindfolded, in absolute darkness, which in December is not entirely a hypothetical. He moves to his place and settles in. The act of settling, of folding oneself into the familiar shape of one's choir stool, is one of the small, uncelebrated pleasures of monastic life. The wood is cool at first, then warming. The hood of his habit can be drawn up slightly if he wishes, which he often does on cold evenings, not for warmth exactly, but for the gentle enclosure of it. The way it makes the world a little smaller, a little more contained, a little more like a held space rather than an open one. Around him, the other brothers are taking their places. There are perhaps 22 of them tonight, sometimes more, sometimes fewer, a brother away on a journey, or resting in the infirmary, or occupied with some necessary task that cannot wait. But tonight, most of the community is present. 22 men of various ages, various temperaments, various histories, all of them folding into their stalls with the same practiced ease, the same quiet readiness, the same unhurried willingness to be here, in this light, in this cold, in this ancient practice. You're safe, my friend. Perfectly, completely safe. Let your breath soften as we settle here together. Let the candlelight reach you. The candles in the choir are not many. Perhaps 8 or 10, set in iron stands at intervals along the central aisle, and 2 larger ones near the altar at the far end of the church. It is enough light to read by, barely. Enough light to see the faces of the brothers across the aisle, the older ones with their eyes already half closed, their lips already beginning to move through the familiar opening words, the younger novices sitting straighter, holding their psalters a little more carefully, still at the stage where they are learning rather than simply being. Brother Thomas does not need his psalter tonight. He hasn't needed it for Compline in years. He knows every word, every inflection, every place where the melody lifts, and every place where it settles back into its deep, unhurried groove. Compline, from the Latin completorium, meaning completion or fulfillment, is the last of the 8 canonical hours that structure the Benedictine day. The 8 offices, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, and compline, are the skeleton around which all other activity is arranged. Work, reading, eating, sleeping, all of these happen in the spaces between the hours of prayer. The prayer is not the interruption. Everything else is the interruption. The prayer is what holds it all together. This is a distinction that took Brother Thomas some years to truly feel rather than merely understand. Compline is brief, shorter than any other office. On most nights it lasts perhaps 15 or 20 minutes, but those minutes have a quality unlike any other part of the day. They are the minutes in which the day is gathered up, the whole of it. The work and the difficulty and the beauty and the monotony, and offered back, set down, surrendered into something larger than any individual monk's experience of it. There is a short opening verse, said quietly, almost whispered, by the abbot or the officiant for the evening, Converte nos, Deus, salutaris noster. Turn us, O God of our salvation, and the community responds, their voices joining in a sound that is never quite the same on any 2 nights, sometimes rough at the edges, sometimes surprisingly pure, always unmistakably human, always carrying within it all the varied weight of the day each man has just lived. Et averte iram tuam a nobis, and turn away your anger from us. What strikes me most about Compline, thinking about it, imagining it, trying to feel what it must have felt like to be inside that stone church on a cold October night, in the 12th century, what strikes me most is the extraordinary sanity of it. The idea that the day has a shape, that it has a beginning and an ending, and that the ending is not simply the moment when you fall exhausted into sleep, but a consciously chosen act of closure, a deliberate laying down. We have lost something, I think, in losing that. The Psalms of Compline are specifically chosen for night, for the transition into darkness. 2. For the handing over of consciousness to something beyond waking control. Psalm 91 is always part of Compline, the one that begins. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High, and its imagery is almost physically comforting. A shelter, a shadow, wings under which to take refuge. These are not abstract theological concepts. They are sensory images, body images, the images of someone who is tired and who needs to rest, and who needs to know that it is safe to rest. Brother Thomas knows this psalm so deeply it no longer moves through him as words. It moves through him as something more like breathing, like the feeling of setting something heavy down after a long walk. The candles hold their small, steady flames. Nothing flickers. The air in the church is absolutely still, warm and still and completely safe, my friend. You're here with us, resting quietly inside this ancient stone. Let the Latin syllables drift around you like warm water. Now comes the Nunc Dimittis, the Canticle of Simeon from the Gospel of Luke. 3 verses, sung to a simple tone that rises and falls like a slow tide. Lord, now you let your servant go in peace. Your word has been fulfilled. It is, in its way, a rehearsal for sleep. Or perhaps more than a rehearsal, perhaps an acknowledgement that each night's sleep is, in its own small way, a practice in letting go, a practice in trusting that the world will continue without your oversight. That the darkness is not empty, but full. That rest is not an absence of life, but one of its deepest expressions. When the canticle ends, there is a short blessing from the officiant, and then silence. But not just silence. There is a particular quality to the silence that follows the last note of Compline, and it is unlike any other silence in the monastic day. It is not the silence of waiting, not the silence of pause. It is the silence of completion, the silence of something having been, fully and faithfully, done. The great silence has begun. It will not end until after the night office of matins, hours from now. Some monasteries extended it until the end of lauds deep into the following morning. In this community, the silence is regarded as one of the most precious of all the monastery's gifts. More precious, some of the older brothers would say if asked, than the library or the garden or even the church itself, because the silence is what everything else grows inside. Brother Thomas remains in his stall for a moment after the others have begun to file out. He often does this. He is not sure it is entirely within the letter of the rule, this small extra minute of sitting, but he hopes that the spirit of the rule would approve, because what he is doing, sitting here in the gradually emptying choir, is simply this. He is feeling the silence begin. He is registering its arrival the way you register the arrival of cool air when a window is opened on a summer evening, with the whole surface of the skin, with something that is almost gratitude. The candles will be extinguished soon, all but one small lamp near the altar that burns through the night as a vigil light. The church will be nearly dark, and in that darkness, for the next several hours the building will simply breathe, quietly, patiently, the way it has breathed on 10,000 nights before this one. He stands, slowly. The wood of his stall sighs softly as his weight leaves it. He turns toward the door, and as he steps back out into the cloister, into the cool night air, into the vast and gentle darkness that now holds the entire monastery in its quiet arms, he feels it fully. The prayer has closed the world. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of sleep, something extraordinary is about to begin. There is a moment, just after the last monk has stepped out of the church and the door has been gently, carefully pulled closed behind him, when the silence becomes something you could almost touch. Not metaphorically, almost literally. Brother Thomas stands in the cloister for a moment, adjusting to it. Even after 11 years, the arrival of the great silence has a physical quality that still surprises him sometimes. A slight change in pressure, almost. The way the air feels different after a deep snowfall, thicker, somehow, and more present, more itself. As though the silence is not simply the absence of sound, but a substance in its own right, something with weight, and texture, and temperature. He breathes in. The cloister air is cool against his face, noticeably cooler than the air inside the church, which carried within it the collective warmth of 22 bodies and 10 candles. Out here, the night is beginning to settle into its deeper registers. The sky above the open square of the cloister garden is a dark, deep blue, not quite black. The blue of a world that has finished its day and is not yet into the full heart of its night. Stars are visible now, more of them than before. The brightest ones have been joined by their quieter companions, the smaller stars that only appear once your eyes have had time to adjust. Brother Thomas doesn't look up for long. There is something about the great silence that naturally draws the attention inward rather than outward. The eyes tend to soften their focus. The gaze drifts down, or simply forward, into the middle distance. The body, released from the necessity of speaking or being spoken to, begins to find its own natural posture, which for Brother Thomas means a slight lowering of the shoulders, a loosening somewhere in the jaw, a feeling in the chest, as though something that had been gently held has been gently released. He begins to walk, slowly, along the covered walkway of the cloister, which runs around all 4 sides of the garden in a covered arcade stone arches on the garden side, a solid wall on the other, the roof low and vaulted overhead. The walkway is perhaps 8 feet wide, and the stone underfoot is worn in a long pale stripe down its centre where generations of feet have traced the same path. The edges are darker, untrodden, almost original in their roughness. This path, this particular path, in this particular monastery, has been walked in silence every night for how long? The monastery was founded perhaps 60 years ago, on land given by a local lord whose name is carved in the chapel, but whom no one alive remembers personally anymore. 60 years of great silences. 60 years of monks walking this same cloister walkway after Compline, their habits brushing the stones, their breath misting in the cold air of November and December, their footsteps very soft, very deliberate, very much their own. What stays with me, imagining this, is the way time collapses inside a tradition. Brother Thomas, walking the cloister in 1165, is in some sense walking alongside every monk who has ever walked it before him. The path holds them all. The worn stripe down its centre is a kind of record not of individual footsteps, which have long since been polished away into smoothness, but of the collective intention behind them. All those nights of chosen quiet, all those nights of deliberately setting the noise of the world aside, you're warm and completely comfortable, my friend. Let your mind drift with Brother Thomas along this quiet stone path. There's nothing you need to do and nowhere you need to be. Just breathe and walk gently with us through this ancient, peaceful night. The rule of St. Benedict addresses silence with remarkable directness and with remarkable gentleness. Benedict does not command silence the way a military rule might command it as mere discipline, as mere enforcement of order. He speaks of it almost tenderly. He writes that monks should be sparing in speech even for good and holy things, because in the abundance of speech, as he puts it, sin is not avoided. But more than this, more than simply avoiding the potential for harm that idle talk can carry, Benedict understood silence as a positive thing, a creative thing, something that doesn't merely prevent disturbance, but actively creates the conditions for something deeper to grow. He called it the cultivation of the interior life. And in the 12th century, in this monastery, in this cloister, the interior life is very much alive. Brother Thomas is thinking about bread. This is the kind of thought the silence produces, and it makes him smile slightly, the inner corners of his mouth lifting in the dark, invisible to anyone. He had bread with his supper earlier, coarse and slightly dense, with a crust that resisted the teeth before giving way, and a crumb that tasted of the grain it came from, and the wood smoke of the oven, and something else underneath all of it, something he can only describe as the taste of effort, the taste of care. Brother Richard baked it, as he baked it every second day, and Brother Richard's bread was one of the small, steady pleasures of life in this community. He is not hungry. He is simply remembering. This is what the silence does. It doesn't empty the mind, despite what people outside the tradition sometimes imagine. It doesn't produce blankness. What it produces is something more like a gentle sorting, a quiet sifting of the day's experiences, one at a time, without urgency. The mind, released from the pressure of conversation and response and external demand, finds its own rhythm, finds its own pace, turns things over softly, the way a hand turns a smooth stone, feeling its weight and surface without any particular need to understand it or explain it. The bread. The particular angle of afternoon light in the scriptorium today. A line from the psalm at none that had lodged in him unexpectedly and kept returning. The sound of rain on the refectory roof at midday. The face of the young novice, Brother Paul, who had come to Thomas after Vespers with a question about a passage in the rule, his face serious and earnest in that particular way of people who are new to something and are trying very hard to do it right. The silence holds all of these, not equally. They rise and fall in their own time without his managing them. This too is a practice, learning not to manage. Learning to let the interior life move at its own pace, rather than constantly rearranging it, constantly trying to resolve it, constantly demanding that it makes sense before it is ready to. He pauses at the corner of the cloister where the walkway turns, and the garden is briefly more visible. A small, dark square of earth and stone, the shapes of a few low herbs just barely discernible in the starlight. There is a stone bench here, set against the wall where the walkway widens slightly. He doesn't sit not tonight. It is too cold for sitting, but he pauses, and rests one hand on the top of the stone, and feels its coolness under his fingers. Cold stone at night. There is a phrase from one of the early desert fathers, those remarkable monks who retreated to the Egyptian desert in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the spiritual ancestors of this entire tradition. There is a phrase that goes something like this: go, sit in your cell, and your cell will teach you everything. Cell, in the monastic sense, did not mean merely a room. It meant the whole of one's enclosure, the whole of the chosen, bounded world within which one had committed to live. And what the phrase meant, what Brother Thomas has understood it to mean, over 11 years of slow understanding, is that the physical reality of the enclosed world, when you stop trying to escape it or improve it or rearrange it, begins to speak to you, in its textures and its temperatures, in its sounds and its silences, in the way the light changes across the same wall, over the course of a day, a season, a year. The cold stone under his hand is speaking to him now. He isn't sure what it is saying. He doesn't need to be sure. He just rests his hand there for a moment longer, in the dark and the quiet, and lets whatever it is saying move through him, without trying to translate it. This, he thinks, not in words exactly, but in the way understanding sometimes arrives before language. This is what the great silence is for. Not for emptying, not for discipline, not even, primarily, for prayer, in the formal sense. It is for this, for the slow, unhurried meeting of a person with themselves, for the patient uncovering of whatever is true and alive, and quietly insistent at the centre of one's own experience. The night air moves slightly. Just a breath of it, barely a movement, more like the air shifting its weight from one foot to the other than like a wind, but it carries something on it, something cool and green and faintly mineral, rain perhaps from somewhere to the north, or simply the turning of the season, moving through the night on its own unhurried schedule. Let that old world drift by while you rest, my friend. You're here, safe and still, inside these ancient walls, inside this extraordinary quiet. Let your breathing slow just a little more. Let the night hold you. Brother Thomas lifts his hand from the stone. He continues his slow circuit of the cloister. One more pass, perhaps, then the dormitory. Then sleep, or at least the first portion of sleep, the deep and dreamless portion that will carry him to matins at 2 a.m, when the bell will call him back into the church for the longest office of the night. But for now, there is only this. the walkway, the stars, the cold air, the sound of his own footsteps very soft on the worn stone, and the sound of his own breathing, slow and even and present, and the silence, the great silence wrapping itself around all of it like something generous, something patient, something that has been here a very long time and will continue long after this particular man on this particular night, has finally, gently let go of the day and drifted down into sleep. He walks, and the monastery breathes around him, and somewhere in the church behind him, the single vigil lamp continues its quiet burning, a small, steady flame in a large, dark space, faithful and unhurried, holding its light against the night. Just as the silence holds everything else, there is something that happens to a building at night that doesn't happen at any other time. It settles, not metaphorically or not only metaphorically. Stone buildings, genuine old ones, genuinely thick-walled ones, actually do shift and murmur slightly as the temperature drops through the evening hours. The limestone contracts almost imperceptibly. The timber roof beams, absorbing the cold, make small sounds a creak here, a soft tick there, sounds so quiet and so infrequent that you only hear them if you are already very still. Sounds that are easy to miss in the daytime, swallowed by footsteps and voices and the general busy texture of a community at work. But at night, in the silence, they are audible, small, intermittent, almost like the building talking to itself. Brother Thomas has always found these sounds comforting. He is in the dormitory now, having completed his circuit of the cloister. The dormitory, the daughter, as it is called, runs along the entire east side of the monastery, above the chapter house and the parlour, accessible from the cloister by a broad stone staircase. It is a long room, perhaps 60 feet long, low-ceilinged, with small window openings along both sides shuttered now against the autumn cold, and a row of simple sleeping spaces running its length. Not rooms exactly, more like alcoves. Each monk has a straw-filled mattress on a low wooden frame, a single wool blanket, and a small shelf on which to place a psalter or a candle stub. No doors, no curtains. The community sleeps together, in one long shared space, which again is not a hardship so much as a philosophy. Privacy, in the monastic imagination, is not always a virtue. The communal dormitory keeps everyone accountable to the same rhythms, the same bedtime, the same rising time, and it means that no one is ever entirely alone in the night. Brother Thomas finds this quietly reassuring. He sets his candle, the small stub he carried up the stairs, on his shelf. He does not extinguish it immediately. He stands for a moment at the edge of his sleeping space, looking down the long room in the dim, wavering light. Most of the brothers are already here, already settled, a few shapes under blankets, already still. The elderly brother Anselm, at the far end of the daughter, whose breathing is already audible, slow and deep and fully surrendered, the breathing of a man who has spent decades practicing the art of letting go. The candlelight moves softly over the low ceiling. It moves the way candlelight always moves, in an enclosed stone space, not flickering exactly, but breathing, expanding and contracting with a rhythm so slow it is almost imperceptible. The shadows on the ceiling shift and resettle. The walls, pale limestone, catch the light and hold it differently than any painted surface, would not reflectively, not glossily, but softly, absorptively, as though the stone drinks the light in rather than bouncing it back. You're here with us, my friend, in this long, warm room, with its breathing candlelight and its quiet sleepers. Let your own body settle now, the way theirs have settled. Let the stone walls hold the room, and let the room hold you. This monastery, like most Benedictine monasteries of the 12th century, was designed according to a plan that was very old even then. The basic layout: cloister at the centre, church on the north side, chapter house and dormitory on the east, refectory on the south, kitchen and storage on the west, had been in use since at least the 9th century, when the great abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland was built, or planned, according to what became the standard template for Western monastic architecture. The plan was so coherent, so well suited to its purpose, that it spread across Europe with relatively few major modifications. You could walk into a Benedictine monastery in England, in France, in Germany, or in Italy, and orient yourself almost immediately because the relationships between the spaces were always roughly the same. This was not an accident. The layout was designed around movement and sound and light, around the daily rhythm of the offices and the ways in which a community of people needed to relate to each other and to God throughout the hours of a day. The cloister at the centre meant that every part of the monastery was always in close relationship with every other part. You were never more than a short walk from the church, from the dormitory, from the refectory. The community was held, architecturally, in a kind of perpetual embrace. What strikes me most about this, thinking about it quietly, is the wisdom embedded in the design. These were not architects in the modern sense, they were monks and abbots and craftsmen, working within a tradition, building what had been built before, refining it slightly, adapting it to their particular landscape and their particular community. And yet what they produced was, in its way, a masterpiece of human-centered design. Every proportional relationship in the building was calibrated toward a single end, the support of the interior life. The thickness of the walls, for instance. 4 feet of solid limestone is not primarily a structural requirement. A building can stand on much thinner walls than that. The thickness is, in part, about acoustics. Those heavy walls absorb sound rather than reflecting it, which is why the church at Compline sounds so different from any modern concert hall. The sound of 22 voices chanting doesn't bounce around the room in a bright, lively way. It sinks into the walls. It is absorbed. What reaches the ear is warm and close, and somehow interior, as though the music is coming from inside you, as much as from the men across the aisle. And the thickness is, in part, about temperature. Those heavy walls store heat slowly and release it slowly. The church is cold in winter. Yes, the monks breath mists, and their fingers stiffen over their psalters, but it is a steady cold, a predictable cold, not the biting, unpredictable cold of the open air. And in summer, the same walls keep the interior cool and dim, a relief from the heat of a working day. The stone is, in other words, a kind of care. Brother Thomas runs his fingers along the wall at the head of his sleeping space. A habitual gesture, almost unconscious, the way a person might rest a hand on the shoulder of a friend. The stone is cool and faintly rough under his fingertips. He can feel the lines of the mortar joints between the individual blocks, thin lines, precisely made, the work of craftsmen who understood that the quality of the mortar joint was what held everything together, was what translated individual stones into a wall, individual walls into a building into a home. Someone made this. This is a thought that visits him sometimes, and it always carries within it a particular quality of warmth. Someone, many someones, in fact, cut these stones from a hillside somewhere, and shaped them, and laid them, and filled the joints between them with careful hands. They sweated over them in summer and blew on their frozen fingers over them in winter. They climbed scaffolding with them. They argued, perhaps, about the best way to turn a corner, the proper pitch for a vault. They went home at the end of each day to whatever homes they had in the nearby village, most likely, or in temporary lodgings closer to the site, and they ate their suppers, and they slept, and they came back in the morning and continued. None of their names are recorded, not one. The monks who commissioned the building are named in the foundation documents. The abbot who oversaw the construction is remembered in a brief chronicle entry. But the men who actually cut the stone and mixed the mortar and built the walls, who held the weight of this place in their actual hands, they are not named anywhere. And yet their work is still here. Their hands are still present in every mortar joint, every shaped stone, every slightly irregular but deeply beautiful arch of the cloister walkway. The building is, in this way, an act of anonymous generosity so large and so lasting that it almost defeats the imagination. Rest easy here, my friend. You're safe inside walls that were made with extraordinary care, walls that have stood for centuries and will stand for centuries more. There's nothing to do but breathe and be held. Brother Thomas extinguishes his candle. The dormitory settles into near darkness, only the faintest suggestion of starlight through the gaps in the window shutters, barely enough to make shapes out of shadows. The room has a smell that he knows well, wool and straw and the faint mineral exhalation of the stone walls, and underneath it all something he can only call the smell of sleep, the particular warm, faintly sweet smell of a room full of sleeping people. It is an intimate smell, a trustworthy smell. He lies down on his mattress. The straw shifts and compresses slightly under his weight. It is not a luxurious mattress. It is lumpy in certain places. There is a knot in the straw toward the middle that he has developed a way of avoiding by sleeping slightly to the left, but it is his, and he knows it, and knowing it makes it comfortable in a way that has nothing to do with luxury. He pulls his blanket up. The wool is thick and slightly scratchy against his chin, but warm. Immediately, definitively warm. The warmth collects around him with a speed that still, after all these years, pleases him. He has never taken warmth for granted, not since boyhood winters in a house with a poor roof, and so the warmth of his blanket on a cold night is always, still, a small and genuine gift. He closes his eyes. From somewhere outside, beyond the shuttered windows, beyond the monastery wall, an owl calls. Once, then silence. Then, after a long pause, once more. It is a sound so perfectly suited to the darkness and the stillness and the cold that it seems less like a bird calling and more like the night speaking to itself, reassuring itself, confirming its own presence. Brother Thomas listens. His breathing has already begun to slow. The church behind him through the dormitory wall, down the stairs through the cloister holds its vigil lamp steady in the dark. The cloister garden exhales its cool, herbed breath into the open air. The scriptorium, 2 floors away, murmurs with the very faint scratch of quills a few brothers still at work, their small oil lamps casting pools of amber light onto vellum and carved oak, and the patient, careful lines of copied text. The building holds all of it. The sleepers and the workers, the silence and the owl, the cold stone and the warm wool, the prayers already said and the prayers yet to come. It holds all of it with the same patient, anonymous generosity with which it was built. And Brother Thomas, eyes closed, breathing very slowly now, feels held, entirely, completely, peacefully held, which is, when you think about it, exactly what a building is for. Not everyone sleeps at this hour. This is one of the things that surprises people when they first imagine the medieval monastery at night, the assumption that once Compline ended and the great silence fell, the entire community simply surrendered to sleep until matins. But the reality was quieter than that, and more interesting. In most Benedictine houses of the 12th century, a small number of brothers were permitted, sometimes required, to continue their work in the scriptorium through the early hours of the night, copying work. The patient, meticulous, extraordinarily skilled labour of reproducing manuscripts by hand. The scriptorium is on the east range of the monastery, above the chapter house, adjacent to the dormitory but separated from it by a short stone passage. It is, by the standards of the rest of the building, a relatively warm room, or at least a room designed to be as warm as possible, because cold hands cannot hold a quill steadily, and cold ink does not flow evenly, and the vellum itself thin scraped animal skin, delicate as old paper, sensitive to changes in humidity and temperature. The vellum will behave badly if the room gets too cold. There is a small brazier in one corner, filled with glowing charcoal, and its warmth radiates across the room in a way that is not entirely sufficient, but is nonetheless deeply welcome. 3 brothers are working tonight. Brother Thomas is already asleep in the dormitory, and we leave him there warm under his wool blanket, breathing slowly, and we drift instead through the short passage and into the scriptorium, where 3 pools of amber lamplight illuminate 3 separate desks, 3 separate bent heads, 3 separate pairs of hands moving with extraordinary care across the surface of their work. Come quietly. We don't want to disturb them. The scriptorium smells different from any other room in the monastery. It has the stone and cold air baseline that runs through the whole building, yes, but layered over it are the specific smells of this room's specific work. Ink, which has a sharp, dark, slightly metallic edge to it. Vellum, which smells faintly animal clean, but animal, carrying a ghost of the creature it came from. The oak gall used in making the ink, which has a dry, almost woody smell underneath its sharpness, and the various pigments used in illumination, some of which have their own distinctive and surprising scents. The lapis lazuli ground for the deepest blues has a faint, cool mineral quality, and the lead white has almost no smell at all, which is somehow itself notable in this room of smells. And there is the lamp oil, linseed, or occasionally walnut oil, burning in small clay lamps that sit at the upper corner of each desk, angled to cast their light downward, and slightly to the left assuming a right-handed scribe, which most of them are. The light from these lamps is warm and amber, and slightly unsteady, not enough to work easily by, if you were not accustomed to it. More than enough, if you have spent years training your eyes and your hands to the conditions of this particular room. You're peaceful here, my friend, drifting through this warm amber light, this quiet room, listening to the softest of all sounds, the sound of a quill moving across vellum. Let that sound settle around you like something gentle. The nearest of the three brothers is a man called in our imagining Brother Edmund. He is perhaps 40 years old, lean, with ink-stained fingers so habitually stained that the dark traces have worked themselves into the lines of his knuckles in a way that no amount of washing entirely removes. He has been a scribe for nearly 20 years. His handwriting, his script, is a thing of genuine beauty, a Caroline minuscule of exceptional regularity, each letter formed with the same precise angle, the same careful proportion, line after line after line of text that looks, when you step back from it, almost like a textile rather than writing, like something woven rather than drawn. He is copying a commentary on the Psalms tonight. A long project. He has been at it for 3 months, and he estimates perhaps 2 more months remain before this particular volume is complete. The text he is copying from sits in a wooden book cradle to his right, held open at the correct page by 2 small leather weights. He glances at it regularly, 3 or 4 words at a time, then back to his own page in a rhythm so practiced it has become almost unconscious. His eyes move, his hand moves. The letters appear on the vellum with a steadiness and a regularity that looks, to an observer, almost effortless. It is not effortless. The physical demands of scribal work were considerable, and were well understood in the medieval period, understood in fact by the scribes themselves, who occasionally left notes in the margins of manuscripts that have survived to this day. Small notes, personal ones, in Latin or occasionally in the vernacular, scribes writing things like, "Writing is excessive drudgery. It crooks your back, it dims your sight, it twists your stomach and your sides," or 3 fingers write, but the whole body toils, or, more simply and perhaps most movingly, "Now I've written the whole thing. For Christ's sake, give me a drink." These marginal notes, called colophons, or sometimes just scribal complaints, are among the most human documents the medieval period has left us. They break through the formal surface of the manuscript tradition with a directness and a personality that can make you laugh out loud, even now, even across 9 centuries. The man who wrote that he deserved a drink was tired and his hand ached, and he wanted someone to acknowledge it, and so he said so, in the margin of a text that was otherwise entirely concerned with theology or history or the lives of saints. What I find quietly wonderful about this is the way it reminds us that behind every one of the thousands of manuscripts that survived from the medieval period, every illuminated psalter, every theological commentary, every chronicle and herbal and book of hours, there was a man, or occasionally a woman, sitting at a desk very much like Brother Edmund's, in a room very much like this one, with aching fingers and tired eyes, and a mind that was doing 2 things simultaneously, holding the shape of every letter with perfect concentration, and wandering freely through its own private landscape of thought. The 2 things, somehow, did not interfere with each other. The hands knew what to do. The mind was free to be elsewhere. Brother Edmund, tonight, is thinking about his mother, not in a painful way, not with grief. She died many years ago, and the grief has long since transformed into something gentler, something more like a kind of tenderness. He is thinking about the way she used to hum while she worked. She was a weaver. He grew up in a house that smelled of wool and loom oil and the particular dusty smell of unspun fibre, and she hummed almost constantly while she worked, without seeming to be aware of it. Not songs, exactly, just sound. A continuous, low, gentle sound that he associated entirely with her and with the particular quality of safety that she represented. He hums sometimes while he copies, not here, not in the scriptorium, where silence is as important as it is anywhere else in the monastery, but in his memory, while his hand moves, the humming is present. His mother's voice, 30 years gone, still moving through his hands. His quill crosses the vellum. The sound it makes, the soft, dry whisper of the feather shaft against the scraped skin, is one of the definitive sounds of this room. You could identify a scriptorium blindfolded by that sound alone, in the same way you could identify a bakery by smell, or a forge by the heat radiating from its door. It is a quiet sound, smaller than you might expect, given that it is the sound by which so much of medieval knowledge was preserved and transmitted. It barely registers above the breathing of the room, and yet it carried that sound. In thousands of rooms like this one, across hundreds of years, the quiet crossing of quill over vellum was one of the most consequential sounds in the history of human thought. Resting gently now, my friend, warm and still, let the soft scratch of the quill become part of your breathing. In and out, slow and steady. Nothing to hold, nothing to keep. At the desk by the window is shuttered, but even shuttered windows admit the faintest breath of outside air, and Brother Edmund has positioned himself as far from it as possible for exactly that reason at the window desk. A younger monk is doing something different. He is illuminating rather than copying, applying colour to a page that the text scribe has already completed. His work is even slower than Brother Edmund's, and even more precise. He is currently working on a capital letter, a large decorative initial at the opening of a psalm, using a brush so fine it has perhaps 3 hairs at its tip. He loads the brush from a small shell of pigment, a deep, warm vermilion, the colour of embers, made from ground cinnabar, and then he applies it to the page in a stroke, so controlled, so deliberately paced, that it appears to take no time at all. But it takes enormous time. The letter he is filling is perhaps 3 inches tall and 2 inches wide. By the time he finishes it, adding the vermilion ground, then the deep blue accents, then the fine black penwork that gives the whole thing its definition and life, he will have spent the better part of 2 evenings on this single letter. 2 evenings, 1 letter, a ratio that seems, by modern standards, almost incomprehensibly slow, and yet the result is a thing of genuine transcendence. When the page is complete, when the vermilion and the blue and the fine black lines are all dry, and the vellum is carefully closed, and the volume eventually finds its way to a choir lectern or a library shelf, the letter will glow. It will glow with a warmth and a presence that is, in part, purely optical vermilion, has a luminosity that modern paints struggle to replicate, but that is also, in some way that is harder to explain, the warmth of the hours spent on it, the warmth of the attention. What stays with me most, thinking about these men at their desks in the lamplight, is not the skill, extraordinary as it was, it is the patience, the deep, bone-deep, apparently inexhaustible patience, the willingness, the eagerness, even to give 2 entire evenings to a single letter, not because anyone was watching, not because they were being measured or evaluated, but because the letter deserved it, because the text it opened deserved it, because beauty, in this tradition, was itself a form of prayer, and prayer was worth whatever time it required. Brother Edmund turns his page. A new sheet of vellum, held flat on the desk by its own slight curl at the edges. He smooths it gently with the heel of his hand, a gesture that is half practical, half tender, sets his quill to the first line, and continues. Outside, the night has deepened. The stars have shifted in their slow arc. The charcoal in the brazier has settled from orange to a deep, pulsing red. Still warm, still present, a small, reliable heart at the centre of the room. The lamplight holds its amber circle. The quill moves across the vellum, And somewhere in all of that patient, unhurried labour, something extraordinary is quietly becoming permanent. Letter by letter, line by line, one careful breath at a time. Step outside with me for a moment, just for a little while, just long enough to feel the night air on your face, and to look up, and to find the particular stillness that only exists outdoors in the deep hours, that vast, unhurried stillness that has nothing to do with walls or roofs or the human arrangements of interior space, but belongs entirely to the open sky and the dark earth and the long, patient breathing of the world beneath them both. There is a garden behind the infirmary, not the small cloister garden, which is largely ornamental, a geometric arrangement of low stone borders and gravel paths designed more for contemplative walking than for practical growing. This is the other garden, the working one. It sits against the south wall of the monastery, where the stone retains a little extra warmth from the afternoon sun even on cold days, and where the wall itself provides shelter from the north wind that sweeps across the open fields beyond the monastery's boundary. It is perhaps 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, not large, by any practical farming standard, but extraordinarily dense, extraordinarily various. In this garden, Brother Cuthbert grows things. He has been growing things in this garden for longer than almost anyone else in the community can remember. He came to the monastery as a young man, very young, perhaps 17 or 18, and he is now somewhere in his late 60s, which makes him one of the oldest members of the community, and certainly the one with the deepest and most intimate knowledge of this particular plot of earth. He knows which corner floods in heavy rain and which patch of soil drains freely. He knows that the rosemary on the western edge grows more vigorously than the rosemary on the eastern edge, and has a theory about why, involving the angle of afternoon light and the slight variation in soil composition. He knows that the old lavender near the infirmary wall, the plant that has been there since before he arrived and that is now more woody stem than green growth, still produces in June, in a good year, the most intensely fragrant lavender he has ever encountered anywhere. He is out here tonight. This is not unusual. In the warmer months, Brother Cuthbert often spends part of the great silence in the herb garden rather than in the dormitory, with the abbot's permission and blessing. Tonight the air is cold, genuinely cold. The cold of an English autumn that is beginning to feel the pull of winter in its bones, and he has his heaviest habit on, and a second layer of wool wrapped around his shoulders in a way that is not precisely within the rules guidelines regarding dress, but that the abbot has long since stopped mentioning. He is checking his plants. This is what he calls it when asked checking. But checking, in Brother Cuthbert's practice, is something considerably more involved than the word suggests. He moves along the rows of the garden with a slowness that makes Brother Thomas's cloister walking look brisk by comparison. He stops at each plant, crouches with the particular careful crouching of an older body that knows its own limitations and looks, touches, brings his nose close to the leaves and breathes in, straightens again, moves on. You're with him now, my friend, in this cold, fragrant garden under the open sky, breathing in the night air, feeling the extraordinary clarity of it. Nothing needs to happen. Nothing needs to be decided. Just breathe and let the garden come to you. The garden at night smells different from the garden in the day. This is something that Brother Cuthbert has known for decades, and that still gives him quiet pleasure every time he steps into the nighttime garden and rediscovers it. In the daytime, the garden's smell is busy, many plants releasing their volatile oils into the warm air simultaneously, creating a complex, layered, sometimes almost overwhelming aromatic mixture. At night, particularly on a cold night, most plants close themselves down. Their smell becomes quieter, more intimate, more individual. You can isolate things at night that are lost in the daytime complexity. The mint is very present tonight. There is a large patch of it in the corner nearest the infirmary door, spearmint mostly, with some peppermint at the edges where it has been gradually colonizing the surrounding soil in the mint's characteristic and unstoppable way. Even in the cold, even in October, the mint retains something of its fragrance. He brushes his fingers across a few leaves as he passes just lightly, just enough to release a little of the oil, and the smell rises up fresh and clean and startlingly vivid, the way mint always is, the way it cuts through everything else around it. He pauses over his feverfew. The feverfew is an important plant, one of the most useful in the infirmary's pharmacopoeia, which Brother Cuthbert maintains with the same careful scholarship that Brother Edmund brings to his manuscripts. Feverfew Tanacetum parthenium, though he knows it by a dozen local names as well, is valued for headaches, for fevers, for certain painful conditions of the joints in elderly patients. The infirmary, Brother Matthew, consults him regularly about it, and about the dozens of other plants in this garden whose properties have been carefully catalogued and whose preparation dried, or infused in oil, or simmered in water, or applied fresh as a poultice, requires the kind of nuanced knowledge that lives in the hands and the nose as much as in any written herbal. And there are written herbals. The monastery library contains several, including a copy made in this very scriptorium, perhaps 10 years ago, of a text that draws on the ancient tradition running from Dioscorides through the Arab physicians, through the great monastic herbalists of the Carolingian period, through to contemporary practitioners. Brother Cuthbert has read it, has argued with it, in the margins, in a handwriting almost illegible with enthusiasm, has corrected it, in places, based on his own observation, because observation is what he trusts most. Not that he mistrusts the texts, he reveres them, but he understands, in a way that is entirely practical and entirely earned, that a text written by a physician in Alexandria in the 1st century AD does not always map cleanly onto a plant growing in the cold clay soil of northern England in the 12th century. The plant is what it is, the garden is what it is. You have to listen to them, not just to the books about them. He crouches by his sage. Sage is one of the plants he loves most deeply loves, actually, is the right word, and he would not be embarrassed to use it. Salvia officinalis. The word salvia comes from the Latin salvere, to save, to heal, and sage has been regarded as a healing plant across so many cultures and so many centuries that it seems less like a property of the plant, and more like something intrinsic to it, something the plant simply is. He rubs a leaf between his fingers and brings it to his nose. The smell is warm and slightly resinous and ancient deeply, unmistakably ancient, the kind of smell that makes the olfactory sense remember things the conscious mind has no record of. He stays there for a long moment, crouching in the dark with sage on his fingers and the cold sky above him and the monastery wall at his back, warm from the day's sun and radiating that warmth slowly into the night air. What stays with me, thinking about Brother Cuthbert in this garden, is the quality of his attention. Not the knowledge, though. The knowledge is impressive, genuinely impressive, representing a lifetime of careful observation and study, but the attention, the way he gives himself entirely to each plant he visits, the way he is not thinking about tomorrow's work, or yesterday's difficulty, or the ache in his knees, or the cold. He is just here, just with the sage, just receiving whatever the sage has to offer on this particular night in this particular season. This is, in a way, the same quality of attention that makes Brother Edmund's manuscript illumination so beautiful, the same quality that makes the Compline chant what it is. The monastic tradition, in all its varied expressions, is fundamentally a tradition of attention, of learning to pay attention so fully, so patiently, so unhurriedly, that the thing being attended to begins to reveal itself in ways it couldn't if you were moving past it quickly. The stars are very clear tonight. Brother Cuthbert stands up slowly, using the wall for support, a concession to his knees, and looks up. The sky is extraordinary. Living in the 12th century, far from any artificial light, on a cold, clear night in the English countryside, the sky is a thing of almost shocking density. Not the sparse scattering of a dozen bright stars that most of us can see on a clear night in a modern city. Something altogether different. Something that requires a moment of readjustment before the eye can begin to organize it into the familiar patterns. Rest in this, my friend. The night sky above this garden, immense and quiet and full of its own ancient light. You're warm and safe beneath it. Let the stars be there, just as they are, without needing to name them or understand them. Just let them be. Brother Cuthbert knows the stars, Not in the way a modern astronomer knows them, not with the language of physics and orbital mechanics and the vast numerical distances between things. He knows them the way a person knows old friends, by character, by behaviour, by the particular quality of their presence at different seasons and different hours of the night. He knows which stars rise in the east as autumn deepens. He knows the slow turning of the whole sky around the pole star, which he thinks of not as a physical phenomenon but as a kind of axle, the still point around which the night turns, dependably, night after night, century after century, with a faithfulness that strikes him as one of the most straightforward arguments for an ordered universe that he can imagine. He uses the stars practically. The night offices are supposed to begin at specific times, and in the absence of any mechanical clock, the mechanical clock will not exist for another 150 years or so. The stars and the position of the moon are among the most reliable timekeepers available to a monastic. Community. He has an instinct, after all these decades, for what hour the sky is at. He can look up on a clear night and tell you, within perhaps 20 minutes, how long until matins. Tonight, he estimates, 2 hours, perhaps a little less. He turns back to his garden. There is one more plant he wants to check before the cold drives him inside. His elder tree, technically too large to be called a garden plant, really a genuine tree now, growing against the southeast corner of the wall, its branches spreading wider each year in a way that is beginning to concern the gardener in him, even as it delights the naturalist. The elder is important, almost as versatile as the sage. In its way, the flowers for fever, the berries for certain preparations, the bark for things he would rather not think about too precisely in the middle of a quiet night. He places his hand on the elder's trunk. The bark is rough and furrowed, with a particular texture that is unlike any other tree he tends. He stands with his hand on it for a long moment, in the dark, in the cold, not doing anything in particular except being there, being present, giving the tree and himself the gift of a moment with no purpose beyond the moment itself. This too is a practice. The garden does not care whether he has a purpose. The stars above him do not care. The monastery wall at his back, still faintly warm, does not care. They are simply present, each of them, in the way that things are present when they have no performance to give and no impression to make, simply, completely, themselves. Brother Cuthbert removes his hand from the elder tree. He wraps his extra wool a little tighter around his shoulders. He takes one long, slow breath of the cold night air, feeling it move down into his lungs, cold and clean and carrying the smell of earth and stone, and frost near plants and the far-off suggestion of rain. And then he turns toward the infirmary door. The warmth inside will meet him at the threshold, and the garden will continue its quiet night behind him, breathing its own slow breath under the enormous, faithful, uncountable stars. The bell begins at 2 in the morning. Not exactly 2. There are no mechanical clocks in this world, and the brother appointed as night porter reads the hour from the stars on clear nights, from a water clock on cloudy ones, and from something harder to name on the nights when neither is quite reliable. An instinct, perhaps. A bodily knowledge of the night's rhythms, accumulated over years of the same responsibility, the same wakefulness, the same careful listening for the moment when the deep silence of the monastery's sleeping hours begins to thin slightly as though the night itself, even before any light appears, somehow knows that it has passed its midpoint and is beginning, almost imperceptibly, to move toward morning. He rings the bell. In the dormitory, the sound arrives like something dropped gently into still water. It spreads outward in rings through the sleeping room, touching each sleeping monk in turn, not violently, not with the sudden urgency of an alarm, but with a kind of steady, patient insistence. Here, now, it is time. The bell knows it is asking something difficult. It rings anyway. Brother Thomas surfaces from sleep the way a man surfaces from deep water slowly, and not all at once. There is a moment, always, between the first sound of the bell and the arrival of full consciousness, when the two worlds coexist. The world of sleep, which has been warm and dark and largely without content tonight, a deep, good sleep, the kind that restores rather than merely suspends in the world of waking, which is cold and dark, and which is asking him to get up, and which he is not yet entirely convinced is real. The bell rings again, and then again. He opens his eyes. The dormitory is very dark. The starlight through the shutters is barely enough to distinguish the shapes of things, the long ridge of the occupied mattresses, the faint gleam of the shelf above his head, the slightly less dark rectangle of the doorway at the far end of the room. Around him he can hear the other brothers waking. Small sounds, the shift of straw, the soft groan of someone's knees, the quiet clearing of a throat. No voices. The great silence still holds. Even the sounds of waking are hushed, considered, careful. He sits up. The cold is immediate. Leaving the warm enclosure of his blanket and sitting upright in the dormitory at 2 a.m. is one of the sharpest physical experiences of the monastic day, sharper in its way than any of the manual labour, sharper than the cold stone floors at Compline, sharper than the winter wind in the cloister garden, because it is the cold of interrupted sleep, the cold that meets a body that was, moments ago, entirely warm and entirely surrendered, and is now being asked to reassemble itself, to recollect its own edges, to remember what it is and where it is, and what it is being asked to do. You're safe and warm, my dear friend. You stay right where you are. You're perfectly comfortable, completely at rest. We're just going to walk quietly alongside Brother Thomas as he makes his way through the dark. You don't have to move at all. Just breathe and drift with us. He reaches for his habit. By the rule, monks slept in their habits, or at least in a simplified version of them, so that the night rising would be as swift and as undisruptive as possible. Some monasteries interpreted this more strictly than others. In this community, the practice is to sleep in the tunic, rising to add the scapular and belt and cowl before descending to the church. Brother Thomas does this now, in the dark, by feel the scapula first, over the head, settling onto the shoulders with the familiar weight he has felt 10,000 times. Then the belt, cinched at the waist. Then the cowl, which is the large, hooded outer garment that is the most distinctively monastic piece of the habit, and which on cold nights like this one serves an almost purely practical function of warmth, even as it serves its formal liturgical function of dignity. He slides his feet into his sandals. The leather is cold. Even through the wool of his socks it is cold, stiff with the night air, and his feet register this immediately and thoroughly. He ties the straps with the automatic sureness of long habit, not looking, his fingers knowing the business of the buckle completely. He stands. Around him, the other brothers are standing too. The dormitory is filling with the soft sounds of the same process, the small repeated domestic sounds of dressing in the dark, multiplied by 22, muffled by the great silence into something almost musical, almost liturgical in itself, a kind of pre-office, a preparation for the preparation, a gathering of individual selves before the community becomes, again, a community. They move toward the door. The night stair. In many Benedictine monasteries, the dormitory was connected directly to the church by a special staircase, the night stair specifically designed for this purpose. The night stair descended from the east end of the dormitory directly into the south transept of the church, so that the monks could move from sleep to prayer with the minimum of exposure to the outdoor cold. In this monastery, the arrangement is similar, a short, steep stair of worn stone, descending from the dormitory passage into the south end of the choir, enclosed on both sides by the thick monastery walls. Brother Thomas descends it carefully. The night stair is perfectly dark. The single small lamp that burns at its foot gives barely enough light to see the step immediately ahead. The others are lost in shadow, and you navigate them as much by memory and muscle as by sight. His hand trails along the left wall as he goes, fingers brushing stone, feeling the gentle coolness of it, the slight variations in surface texture that tell him where he is on the descent. Third step from the bottom has a slight unevenness on the left side. His foot knows it and adjusts automatically. Second step from the bottom is half an inch lower than the others, another old acquaintance. He reaches the bottom, turns left, and steps into the church. The church at 2 in the morning is a different building from the church at Compline. It takes a moment, always takes a moment to register this. The architecture is the same carved choir stalls, the same pale limestone walls, the same vaulted ceiling disappearing into darkness above. The same vigil lamp at the altar, its small flame burning with perfect steadiness, giving just enough light to confirm the shape of things without illuminating them. But the quality of the space is entirely different. At Compline, the church was an interior made warm by candlelight and communal presence, the day still recently enough behind it that its warmth lingered in the air, and the bodies of the men who had spent it together. At 2 in the morning, the church has become something else, something older, something larger. Somehow, despite the fact that its physical dimensions are identical, the darkness in the upper reaches of the nave above the candles, above the choir stalls, above even the light of the vigil lamp, is a genuine darkness. Not the darkness of absence, but the darkness of depth. The kind of darkness that makes the eye reach upward and find nothing, and somehow, strangely, unexpectedly find that restful. What strikes me most about the idea of matins in a medieval monastery is not the difficulty of it, the cold, the interrupted sleep, the long hours of chanting that lie ahead, but the extraordinary beauty of the setting in which that difficulty was encountered. A stone church in absolute darkness except for a few small flames. 22 men, still half dreaming, finding their way to their stalls and opening their mouths to sing psalms into the dark. The sound of those voices rising through that cold air and disappearing into that high, dark ceiling. Nothing from the outside world can reach you here, my friend. You're inside something ancient and profoundly peaceful. Let the darkness be comfortable. Let it be the darkness of deep rest, of held space, of a world that is simply being itself in the quiet hours. Breathe slowly. You're held completely. Matins, also called vigils in some traditions, or the night office, is the longest of the 8 canonical hours. On ordinary days, it consists of 1 nocturne, 3 psalms, a versicle, an absolution, and 3 readings with their responses. On Sundays and feast days there are 3 nocturnes, and the office can last an hour or more, 2 hours on the greatest feasts. Tonight is an ordinary weekday, so it will be shorter. But even a shorter matins, at 2 in the morning, in a cold church, has a particular quality of duration that is unlike any other experience in the monastic day. Brother Thomas takes his stall. His body is still not fully awake. There is a quality to consciousness at this hour that he has come to think of as not quite dreaming, and not quite waking a state somewhere between the two, in which the ordinary divisions between inside and outside, between self and world, between thought and sensation, are slightly more permeable than usual. The body is upright, the hands hold the psalter, the eyes can read the familiar text. But underneath all of this, something is still moving in the deeper current of sleep, still drifting, still processing the dark images and formless feelings that the sleeping mind generates and that the waking mind usually loses entirely upon rising. At matins, you don't entirely lose them. The psalms enter through this slightly open door between the states of consciousness, and they have a different quality because of it, more immediate, somehow, more personal. The words of Psalm 63, "O God, you are my God, I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water," these words, sung in the dark at 2 in the morning by a man still partially in the current of sleep, land differently than they do at any other office. They arrive without the usual layers of interpretation and context. They arrive as pure feeling, pure need. The community chants. The sound fills the cold church in the particular way that monastic chant fills a stone space, not loudly, not with the concentrated power of a choir performing for an audience, but with a kind of pervasive, distributed warmth. The voices are not all equally beautiful. Some are cracked with age, some are simply ordinary, some are barely awake enough to stay on pitch. But together, they make something that is larger than the sum of its parts, something that is less a performance and more a presence, a living presence, moving through the stone and the dark and the cold, finding its way into every corner of the building, every fold of every habit, every half-sleeping mind. Between the psalms, there is silence, and the silence between the psalms at Matins is different from all other silences. It is charged with the vibration of the chant that just ended, and with the anticipation of the chant about to begin. It is the silence of a breath held not in tension, but in suspension. The silence of the moment between a wave receding and the next wave arriving, when the shoreline is briefly, perfectly still. Brother Thomas breathes in that silence. His eyes are half closed. His hands rest loosely on the open psalter in his lap. The vigil lamp at the altar casts its small circle of warm light across the sanctuary floor, a circle that seems, in this darkness, at this hour, almost symbolic, almost like a promise, a small, steady, completely reliable declaration that light exists, that it is here, that it has not gone anywhere, and does not intend to. He fixes his gaze on it. That small flame. And the chanting begins again, rising out of the dark like something that has always been there and always will be, older than this building, older than this community, older even than the language it is being sung in, rising and falling and rising again, patient as water, steady as stone, warm as the single lamp that burns in the sanctuary of a cold church at 2 a.m. in the 12th century. Faithful, present, enough. Matins ends the way it always ends, not with a flourish, not with any sense of conclusion that announces itself, simply with the last response of the last responsory, the final quiet blessing from the officiant, and then the gradual, unhurried dissolution of the assembled community men, rising from their stalls in ones and twos, moving toward the night stair or the side doors, their footsteps soft on the choir floor, their breath still misting faintly in the cold air of the church. Some will return directly to the dormitory. The rule permits this, encourages it, even on ordinary nights. The interval between Matins and Lauds is meant for rest, for reading, or for the continuation of whatever work was set aside at Compline. In summer, when the nights are short and Lauds follows Matins almost immediately, there is barely time to return to the dormitory before the bell rings again. But in autumn and winter, the interval is longer, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes more, and the community disperses into its various quiet activities with the slightly dazed, slightly loosened quality of people moving through the world in the deep hours, when the ordinary social architecture of the day has been temporarily suspended. Brother Thomas does not go back to the dormitory immediately. Tonight, he goes to the warming room. He is not alone in this. As he steps out of the south transept door into the cloister, he can see 2 or 3 other dark shapes moving in the same direction, the slightly shuffling walk of men who are cold and tired, and making their way toward the one place in the monastery where warmth can reliably be found at this hour. There is nothing furtive about this movement. The warming room is a legitimate place to be. Its existence is, in fact, mandated by the rule, or at least by the common-sense interpretation of the rule that most abbots applied to communities living in the cold northern climates of England and France and Germany, where the austerity of the Italian original needed to be adjusted for the simple practical reality of winters that could genuinely damage the health of men who spent large portions of their days in unheated stone buildings. The warming room, the calefactory, in the Latin of the monastery's documents, is on the ground floor of the East Range, between the chapter house and the refectory passageway. It is not a large room, perhaps 20 feet square, with a low vaulted ceiling and walls that are noticeably thicker even than the rest of the monastery's already thick walls. In the centre of the floor, or rather set into the floor, in a shallow stone-lined pit there is a fire, a real fire, wood mostly, with some charcoal banked over it to keep it alive through the night. On cold days it is tended from morning to evening and allowed to diminish only through the night hours. On the coldest nights of deep winter, a brother is sometimes appointed to maintain it through the darkness. Tonight the fire has been burning since mid-morning, and the room holds its accumulated heat, the way a good wool blanket holds body warmth thoroughly, generously, without reservation. Brother Thomas pushes open the door, and the warmth meets him. "You're here with us now, my friend. in this small, warm room. Let the warmth be real. Let it reach you wherever you are, whatever surface you're resting on. Your body is warm, your breathing is slow. Nothing is required of you. Simply be here, in this room, in this gentle heat. The warmth of the calefactory is a different quality of warmth from the warmth of the dormitory blanket, or the warmth of the church's collective body heat during the offices. It is active warmth, radiant warmth, the warmth of actual fire, which has a way of feeling personal, as though it is directed specifically at you, as though the fire knows you are cold and is addressing itself to that fact with genuine attention. He steps inside. 4 other brothers are already here. Brother Anselm, the elderly monk from the far end of the dormitory, is seated on the stone bench that runs along the left wall, close enough to the fire that his hands, held loosely in his lap, are visibly orange in the firelight. His eyes are half closed. He may be praying, he may be sleeping. He may be doing something that is genuinely both at once a state that Brother Thomas has come to think of as one of the particular gifts that the monastic life makes available to those who stay in it long enough. The dissolution of the boundary between formal prayer and simple restful presence. Brother Paul, the young novice, is on the opposite bench. He is fully awake, his eyes bright, his posture attentive, his hands wrapped around a small cup of something warm that he must have prepared in the kitchen passageway. He looks up when Brother Thomas enters, and his face moves into the particular expression of nocturnal community, a slight softening, a fractional smile, the wordless acknowledgement that says, "You too." Yes, here we are, in the middle of the night, in the cold, finding our way to the warm room. There is something quietly wonderful about being human. Brother Thomas settles onto the bench beside the fire. He extends his hands toward the heat, not dramatically, not with any urgency, just settling them into the warmth the way you settle a tired back into a good chair. The heat begins its work immediately, moving through his fingers with a sensation that is not quite pain and not quite pleasure, but something warm and bright and closely related to both. His knuckles, stiff from the cold church, begin to loosen. His fingers uncurl slightly. He watches the fire. The fire in the calefactory is a working fire, not a decorative one. There is nothing particularly artistic about it, no careful arrangement of logs for aesthetic effect. It is simply a fire, burning because it is needed, tended because it is useful. And yet watching it at this hour, in this silence, with a mind still half adrift in the undertow of the night office, it has a quality that goes beyond mere utility. Fire at 2 a.m. is a different fire from fire at any other hour. What strikes me about this, sitting with it quietly, is the way our relationship with fire runs so much deeper than our conscious knowledge of it. Every human nervous system alive today is descended from nervous systems that lived by firelight for hundreds of thousands of years, that slept beside fires, cooked beside fires, made decisions in firelight, grieved and celebrated, and fell in love in firelight. The response we feel to an open fire, the particular quality of ease it produces, the way attention both sharpens and softens simultaneously in its presence, is not an aesthetic preference. It is something biological, something ancient and deeply embedded, running far below the reach of any particular century or culture. Brother Thomas feels this without knowing any of the science. He simply feels good. He feels present. He feels the specific quality of aliveness that comes from being warm in a cold night, awake in a sleeping world, surrounded by the quiet presence of other human beings who are also warm, also awake, also simply here. Brother Anselm makes a small sound, not a word, just a sound, a soft exhalation that carries within it a quality of contentment so complete and so uncomplicated that it is almost moving to hear. He shifts slightly on his bench, resettles his hands, and is still again. His breathing is deep and completely regular. The fire pops once, a small sound, bright and quick, and then silence again. The calefactory has its own particular smell. Wood smoke is part of it, a clean, slightly sweet smoke from the hardwood logs, not the heavy acrid smoke of green or wet wood. But there is also the smell of the room itself, the stone walls, which have absorbed years of wood smoke and warm air into their surfaces, and which release it now in a way that is somehow more intimate than the smell of any fresh fire. The accumulated warmth of hundreds of winter nights, held in the limestone, release slowly back into the air of this room. You are not just warming yourself at this fire. You are warming yourself at every fire that has ever burned in this room, in some small and real way. Let that warmth be yours, my friend, all of it, the warmth of this fire and every fire before it, the warmth of every human being who has ever sat in a warm room on a cold night and felt simply grateful. You're held in all of that, completely safe, completely at rest. Brother Paul has finished his warm drink. He sets the cup carefully on the stone bench beside him and folds his hands in his lap, and his posture changes very slightly, the attentiveness softening a little, the shoulders dropping a fraction, the eyes losing their novice's bright watchfulness and becoming something quieter, more receptive. He is learning, Brother Thomas thinks. Learning the particular art of simply being present without needing to do or understand anything. It takes novices a long time to learn this, some never quite manage it. They come from a world where stillness is suspect, where sitting without visible purpose feels like failure, where the interior life is perpetually subordinated to the demands of external activity. The monastery asks them to reverse this entirely, to treat the interior life as the primary reality and all external activity as secondary. It is a reversal so fundamental that it can take years to accomplish, even approximately. Brother Paul is doing well. Thomas watches him without watching him, the peripheral, undemanding observation of someone who is not evaluating but simply noticing. The young man's face in the firelight is very peaceful. Whatever thoughts he is having, and he is certainly having thoughts, the young ones always are, their minds restless and generative, and still learning to settle whatever thoughts they are not troubling him. They are simply passing through, the way clouds pass through a clear sky, observed without being grasped. The fire settles. One of the logs has burned through, and its remnants shift downward into the bed of coals with a soft, collapsing sound and a brief brightening of the flames. For a moment the whole room is a little brighter, a little warmer. Every face in the room catches the light. 5 faces, turned toward the fire, or simply resting in its vicinity, each one carrying its own history, its own particular accumulated weight of years and experience and prayer and doubt and peace. They are very different from each other, these 5 men, different ages, different backgrounds, different temperaments, different reasons for being here. One came as an oblate, given to the monastery as a child by a family who could not keep him. One came fleeing a difficult marriage that ended in the early death of his wife, seeking not escape but transformation. One came, like Brother Thomas, from an unexpected moment of clarity that rearranged everything he had previously understood about himself. One has been here so long he barely remembers any other kind of life. 5 different stories, 5 different paths through the world, all arriving, tonight, at this fire. This is what I find most moving about the warming room, not the fire itself. Remarkable as it is, not the architecture, not even the extraordinary sensory richness of the space. What moves me most is this. In a world that divided people with extraordinary thoroughness along lines of class and birth and occupation and wealth, the warming room was one of the few places where a former nobleman and a former blacksmith and a boy who grew up in poverty could sit together at the same fire, in the same silence, on the same stone bench, in exactly the same relationship to the warmth. The monastery had hierarchies, there were always hierarchies, but here, at 2 a.m. before the fire, they were very quiet, very small. Smaller than the cold outside, smaller than the warmth inside, smaller than the simple fact of being human and alive and grateful for heat. Brother Thomas spreads his fingers wider toward the fire. The heat moves deeper into his hands. He closes his eyes. For a few minutes, just a few, he lets himself be entirely without thought, without intention, without anything at all except the warmth on his face and the sound of the fire and the slow, steady breathing of 4 other human beings in the same small room, on the same cold night in the same extraordinary, ordinary life. The fire burns, the monastery breathes, and outside the thick walls of the calefactory, the night continues its slow arc toward morning, unhurried, patient, carrying within its darkness everything that the day will need when it arrives. Stars above the cloister garden, an owl somewhere along the monastery wall, and in a small warm room, 5 men sitting with their hands extended toward a fire, doing nothing, needing nothing, simply warming themselves in the deep and grateful silence of the middle of the night. There is a particular kind of thinking that only happens in the middle of the night, not the sharp, purposeful thinking of the morning hours, when the mind is fresh and the day's tasks are lined up ahead of it like stones crossing a stream, and not the heavy, reluctant thinking of evening, when the mind is tired and inclined to simplify everything it encounters. The thinking that happens at 2 or 3 in the morning, especially after the night office, especially in the warm aftermath of the calefactory fire, especially in a body that is neither fully awake nor fully asleep. This thinking has a quality all its own. It moves differently, more slowly and more deeply, less interested in problems and solutions, more interested in simply turning things over, feeling their weight, noticing their texture. Brother Thomas is walking again. He has left the warming room, leaving Brother Anselm still half asleep by the dying fire, and Brother Paul still quietly present in the firelight, and he is walking the south range of the cloister, now a covered walkway with the refectory wall on one side, and the open arcade of the cloister garden on the other. The night has deepened since Compline. The cold is more thorough now, more settled, the cold of the genuine night hours, not merely the cold of a day that has recently ended. His breath mists steadily before him, small clouds appearing and disappearing with each exhale, visible for just a moment before the darkness absorbs them. He is thinking about the walls. This is a thought that visits him sometimes at this hour, and it has become, over the years, something he thinks of almost as a companion, a recurring meditation. He walks the cloister and he thinks about what the walls remember, and the thought unfolds at its own pace, without any urgency, opening gradually the way a flower opens, not all at once, and not on any schedule that belongs to the observer. The monastery was founded, as he knows, approximately 60 years ago. Before that, this land was a meadow, or possibly a field. There is some disagreement in the documents about what exactly occupied this site before the first stone was laid. Whatever it was, someone stood on it one day and looked at it and said, in effect, "Here, this is the place." And then the work began, the slow, extraordinary, anonymous work of building something that was intended to outlast not just the people who built it, but the entire civilization they were part of. That intention, it moves him every time he thinks about it, the sheer ambition of it and the sheer humility of it, simultaneously, because the men who built this place were not building it for themselves. They were building it for the community that would use it, and for the communities that would come after, generation after generation, in a succession that the founders could not possibly predict or imagine in its details, but that they believed in with absolute confidence. They built for people they would never meet. They built for people who were not yet born. They built thicker walls than they strictly needed, wider arches than the roof loads required, deeper foundations than the soil absolutely demanded, because they understood that the gift they were giving was not just a building but a margin of safety, a surplus of solidity, deliberately included so that the thing would last. You're resting inside that gift right now, my friend, inside something built with extraordinary generosity and extraordinary patience. Let the walls hold you. They were made for exactly this, to hold, to last, to keep the cold out and the warmth in for as long as anyone needs them. Breathe slowly. You're completely safe. Brother Thomas stops at a particular place on the south wall. He stops here often. There is nothing visually distinctive about this spot, it looks like. Every other section of cloister wall, pale limestone, slightly darkened near the floor from decades of proximity to the ground's moisture. But he stops here because of what he knows is on the other side of the wall, the refectory, where the community eats its meals together in silence while a reader reads aloud from the lectern. And he stops here, specifically because of a story he was told in his first year at the monastery by an older monk who has since died. The story was this. In the early years of the monastery, perhaps 15 or 20 years after its founding, there was a winter of extraordinary severity, a winter that the chronicler in his brief account described only as such cold as had not been seen in living memory, and the river frozen from bank to bank for 40 days. During that winter, the community was tested in ways that went beyond mere discomfort. Food supplies ran short, several brothers became seriously ill, the building, still relatively new, showed its vulnerabilities drafts in places the builders had not anticipated, dampness in the lower dormitory, the church so cold that the ink in the inkwells froze during the morning offices, and yet the community endured. Not heroically, the chronicler does not describe heroics. He describes something quieter and, in its way, more impressive than heroics. He describes the community continuing to pray, continuing to work, continuing to care for its sick members and maintain its routines, with what he calls a simplicity of purpose that he found more admirable, looking back, than any dramatic act of courage could have been. They simply continued. Day by day, office by office, meal by meal, through 40 days of frozen river and frozen ink and cold that got into the bones and stayed there. By spring, they were all still alive. All of them. And the following summer, they repaired the drafts, improved the insulation in the lower dormitory, and added the extra layer of stone to the north wall of the church that Brother Thomas can feel now when he places his hand there, a slightly different texture, a slightly different colour in the limestone, if you know to look for it. A repair, a response, the building learning from its own experience, the way communities learn from their own experience, improving itself quietly in the aftermath of difficulty. What stays with me about this story, and what I think Brother Thomas finds in it, standing at the south wall in the middle of the night, is not primarily the hardship, or even the resilience. It is the continuity, the thread of lived experience running through this place from its founding to this present moment, connecting generation to generation in a chain of small daily decisions to pray, to work, to repair the drafts, to keep going that adds up, over time, to something that can only be called a tradition, a living tradition, one that exists not in any document or rule, but in the accumulated habits and memories and physical adaptations of a community that has been, simply, here. The old monk who told him this story, Brother Gerard, his name was a small man with an extraordinarily kind face and hands that were permanently calloused from decades of garden work. Brother Gerard told it without drama, just as a fact, just as part of the texture of this place, one thread among many in the fabric of the monastery's living memory. He had heard it from an older monk, who had heard it from a monk who had actually lived through it, who had told the story as a simple statement of what happened that winter and what came after. 3 generations of telling, and now Brother Thomas carries it the way these walls carry the memory of the hands that built them, not consciously, not as a deliberate act of preservation, but simply as part of what he is, part of what it means to have been here, in this place, for 11 years. He walks on. The cloister garden is very still. The stars have moved since Compline. The whole sky has rotated on its ancient axis. The familiar constellations shifted in their positions. The moon, which rose low on the horizon after matins, now standing higher, its cold light touching the top of the garden wall and the upper branches of the elder tree visible above the infirmary roof. The moonlight does something interesting to the stone of the cloister, bleaches it slightly, flattens it, makes it look simultaneously older and newer than it does in daylight, more purely itself. Brother Thomas pauses at the northeast corner of the cloister. Here, in the angle of the wall, someone has carved something into the stone. Not a formal inscription, not Latin, not any text he has ever been able to read. Just a small, simple shape. A cross, perhaps 3 inches tall, scratched into the mortar between 2 limestone blocks with something sharp, a nail, or the point of a belt buckle, or the tip of a blade. Scratched carefully, deliberately, by someone who was standing in this exact spot at some point in the past and felt moved to leave this small mark. This small, indelible, entirely anonymous mark. No one knows who made it. No one knows when. It was here when Brother Thomas arrived, and the monk who gave him his initial tour of the cloister pointed it out with a brief gesture and the words, "It's always been there, as far as anyone knows." And nothing more. It has always been there. A person stood here, my friend, stood in this exact corner of this exact cloister, perhaps 100 years ago, perhaps 50, perhaps 30, and felt something strongly enough to want to leave a mark, to say, in the only way immediately available to them, "I was here. I stood in this place. This moment happened. Rest here for a moment with that thought." With the extraordinary simple fact that human beings have always wanted to say, "I was here." That the impulse to mark one's presence not out of vanity, but out of some deep instinct toward connection, toward the acknowledgement that one's existence is real and has weight, that this impulse is as old as humanity itself and as new as this moment. You are here too, my friend. Whatever night this is, wherever you are, whatever surface you're resting on, you are here. And that is enough. That is more than enough. Brother Thomas reaches out and places one finger on the small carved cross. It is cool under his touch, smooth from whatever weather and hands have found it over the years. The lines of it are simple and clear. You can feel them easily, even in the dark. Feel the slightly raised edge where the mortar was displaced by whatever made the mark. He holds his finger there. He is not praying. Exactly. He is not thinking. Exactly. He is doing something that has no precise name, but that feels, in this moment, absolutely necessary, connecting himself, through the medium of this small carved mark, to the unnamed person who made it, bridging whatever gap of time and circumstance lies between them, acknowledging that both of them stood in this corner of this cloister with the same cold air on their faces, and the same stars above the garden, and the same limestone walls around them, the same monastery, the same silence, the same extraordinary privilege of a life built around stillness and prayer, and the patient daily practice of paying attention. He removes his finger from the stone. He stands for a moment longer in the corner, his back to the wall, looking out across the small dark garden. The moon has touched the centre of the garden now, and in its light, the low stone border of the path is just visible, a pale line crossing the dark earth, dividing the garden into its quadrants, with a geometric clarity that is both practical and, in this light, at this hour, quietly beautiful. He thinks about the monks who have prayed in this cloister before him, not abstractly, not as a theological idea, the communion of saints, the cloud of witnesses, the mystical body of the church. All of that is true, and he believes it, and it sustains him. But what he is thinking about right now is more immediate and more personal than any theological category. He is thinking about the actual people, the man who carved the small cross, the community that endured the great winter, the abbot who decided that this meadow was the right place, and stood here on a summer morning 60 years ago, and looked at the land and said, "Here." All of them lived in this same air. All of them knew this same cold. All of them walked to this same church and sang these same psalms and lay down on their mattresses at night with the same deep, bone-level tiredness. That is the specific tiredness of a day, lived fully and purposefully, a tiredness that is almost indistinguishable from contentment. He feels them here, not as ghosts, not as presences in any dramatic sense, simply as the weight that any place accumulates when it has been lived in, loved in, prayed in, worked in, for a long time by people who are genuinely here, genuinely present, genuinely committed, genuinely alive to the life they were living. A good weight, a weight that holds rather than burdens. He breathes in the cold night air deep and slow and full and breathes it out again, and he turns and continues his quiet circuit of the cloister. The walls hold their silence around him, patient and full, and remember everything. The kitchen is never entirely cold. This is one of the quiet constants of monastery life, a fact so ordinary and so reliable that it tends to go unnoticed during the day. when the kitchen is busy and warm and full of the particular purposeful noise of food being prepared for a community. But at this hour, deep in the night, when the kitchen has been empty since shortly after Compline, the quality of its warmth is something different, something more intimate. The fire in the great bread oven has been banked but not extinguished, a careful arrangement of ash and live coals that will keep the interior warm enough through the night that the morning's first bread can be loaded in with minimal additional heating. The oven breathes out its warmth into the kitchen in a slow, continuous exhalation, and the kitchen holds it, and the stone walls hold it, and the whole south range of the monastery is just very slightly warmer than it would be if the kitchen did not exist. Brother Thomas has paused outside the kitchen door. He didn't plan to come here. He was walking the cloister, following his thoughts through the south range, and the kitchen door was simply there, slightly ajar, as it often is at night, to allow the accumulated steam and cooking smoke of the day to dissipate slowly, and through the gap there came a smell so immediately and so completely comforting that his feet simply stopped without consulting his intentions. Bread. Not fresh bread, not the bright, yeasty, almost sharp smell of bread just out of the oven, which is a smell of immediacy and heat and anticipation. This is older than that. This is the smell of bread that was baked this afternoon, that has been cooling on the wooden rack since Vespers, that has passed through its initial heat and settled into something deeper and more complex, a smell that is warm and slightly sweet and faintly nutty, and carries within it, underneath all the other notes, the deep, fundamental smell of grain, of wheat grown in a field somewhere not very far from here, cut and threshed and milled into the flour that became this bread, the whole arc of it compressed into a smell hanging in the air of the dark kitchen at 3 a.m. He pushes the door open a little wider and steps inside. "You're here with us, my friend. In this warm, dark kitchen that smells of bread and wood ash and the comfortable abundance of a well-tended larder, let that warmth settle around you. Let the smell reach you wherever you are. Breathe in slowly and let everything soften just a little more. The kitchen is a generous room, larger than the warming room, larger than most rooms in the monastery, because it needs to be, because it produces 3 meals a day for the entire community, as well as maintaining the various preparations and preserves and infirmary supplies that require kitchen space and equipment. The ceiling is high, blackened with years of cooking smoke. The walls, also blackened near the ceiling, pale limestone below, have a quality of absorbed history that reminds Brother Thomas of the chapter house walls, every surface telling its own quiet story of use and time. The great bread oven occupies most of the north wall. It is a massive construction, a barrel-vaulted chamber of fire brick and stone, big enough for a man to lean inside with his arm extended, which is how the bakers test the temperature before loading. When fully fired, it radiates heat across the entire kitchen with an intensity that makes summer baking a genuinely challenging undertaking. At this hour, banked down to coals, it simply breathes warmth steady and enveloping, the warmth of something that has been hot for many hours and is now cooling slowly, but with great deliberateness, as though even in diminishment it intends to be as useful as possible. On the wooden rack beside the oven, 4 round loaves rest. Brother Thomas looks at them in the dim light from the small oil lamp that burns through the night near the kitchen door, a safety measure left by the evening's last worker before retiring. The loaves are dark on top where the crust formed during baking, and their surfaces have the particular rough, organic irregularity of hand-shaped bread no two quite the same shape, each one slightly flattened or angled in its own individual way, as though the bread has a personality that asserted itself despite the baker's intentions. He has eaten bread like this for 11 years, every single day, twice a day, at dinner and at supper, in the refectory, in silence, while the reader's voice moved through a text from the lectern, and the community ate together in the particular focused, attentive way that the rule requires eating as a communal act, a shared act, something done together and with awareness, not merely a bodily function to be gotten through between more important activities. He has never once in 11 years taken the bread for granted. This surprises him sometimes when he thinks about it. In the world before the monastery, in the life of trade and travel, and the ordinary busyness of a man making his way, he ate bread, certainly. Ate it daily, ate it without thinking, ate it the way you breathe, which is to say automatically and without any particular awareness of what you are doing or what it represents. But here, in the refectory, with the rules requirements of attention and gratitude shaping every meal, he came to understand the bread differently, to understand it as what it actually is, which is the end product of an extraordinary chain of labour and care and natural process, involving soil and seed and rain and sun and human hands at every stage, a chain so long and so intricate that it is almost impossible to hold entirely in mind. What strikes me about this, what I find quietly profound, is the way the monastery's insistence on gratitude at meals was not primarily a religious instruction, but an epistemological one, an instruction about how to see, about how to look at a piece of bread and perceive what is actually there, which is not merely food, not merely fuel, but the accumulated effort and generosity of dozens of people and the cooperative labour of an entire natural system, all of it converging on this moment, on this table, on this simple round loaf. When you can see that, the bread tastes different. It really does. Near the bread rack, on a lower shelf, there is a small ceramic pot with a wooden lid. Brother Thomas knows what is in it without looking. He has seen it there many times. Honey, from the monastery's own hives, kept in the orchard, beyond the kitchen garden by Brother Cuthbert, who tends his bees with the same patient devotion he gives to his herbs. The honey from these hives has a particular character darker than the honey from hives kept in purely agricultural land, with a complexity that reflects the variety of the monastery's gardens and the meadows and hedgerows beyond the walls. Thyme is in it, and clover, and something floral that Brother Cuthbert thinks might be the wild roses along the south boundary, and underneath all of it something deeper and less identifiable, what Brother Cuthbert simply calls the taste of this place, by which he means the specific botanical character of this particular patch of English countryside. Brother Thomas does not take any honey tonight. It is not his to take. The kitchen stores are managed by the cellarer, and individual monks do not help themselves without permission, which is both a practical rule and a spiritual one, the practice of not grasping, of not taking what is available simply because it is available, of allowing desire to exist without automatically satisfying it. But he stands near the pot for a moment, and the smell of honey faint through the wooden lid, but present, unmistakable, sweet and complex, and deeply familiar reaches him, and something in him softens in response. Just breathe, my friend, warm and still, and completely held, the smell of honey and bread and warm stone. The quiet of the kitchen at the deep of the night. There's nothing to do and nothing to need. Just rest here, gently, in this abundance. The Benedictine tradition has always had a complex and thoughtful relationship with food. Benedict himself wrote about it with a nuance that sometimes surprises people who expect monastic rules about eating to be primarily about restriction and austerity. And there is certainly an element of simplicity in the monastic diet, no extravagant preparations, no elaborate variety for its own sake, no indulgence in eating as entertainment or status display. But Benedict also wrote, with characteristic directness, that the amounts of food and drink should be sufficient for the needs of the body, and that the abbot should take into account the weakness of those who are infirm, the young, and the old, adjusting the common measure generously for their needs. Sufficient, generous. These are not the words of someone who understood the body as an obstacle to spiritual life. They are the words of someone who understood the body as part of spiritual life, as the medium through which all other experience, including spiritual experience, is received and expressed. A hungry monk is not a more spiritual monk. He is a distracted one, his attention pulled away from prayer and work by the insistent demands of an unmet physical need. The well-fed monk, fed with good, honest food, prepared with care and eaten with gratitude, is freer to give his attention to the things that matter most. This is a wisdom that seems simple once you understand it, and yet took the Western monastic tradition centuries to fully articulate and embody. Brother Thomas thinks about tomorrow's meals. Pottage at dinner. He doesn't know what Brother Richard is planning for the pottage, but it will involve whatever vegetables are still available from the kitchen garden at this stage of autumn, supplemented by dried legumes from the storeroom. Peas, probably. Perhaps some leeks, if there are any left. The pottage will be thick and warm and slightly starchy in the satisfying way of legume-based dishes, and he will eat it in silence at his place in the refectory, while Brother Augustine reads from the Life of St. Martin of Tours, which they have been working through this week. And the bread. Always the bread. He finds himself thinking about Brother Richard, the baker, in the way he sometimes thinks about the anonymous craftsman who built the monastery walls with a kind of affectionate gratitude for work done well, and done consistently, without fanfare or particular recognition, as a form of service that is simultaneously ordinary and essential. Brother Richard bakes every second day, has been baking for this community for perhaps 15 years. Every 2 days, he measures out the flour and the water and the small amount of leaven kept from the previous batch, and he mixes them together, and he kneads the dough, a physical process that takes considerable time and effort, working the gluten into its proper structure, feeling the dough change under the hands from shaggy and resistant to smooth and yielding, and he shapes the loaves, and he loads the oven, and he waits, and he removes them, and he sets them on the rack. 15 years of this. Several thousand loaves. Not one of them wasted. As far as Brother Thomas knows, the monastery practices a careful economy with its food, using every part of what it grows and prepares, finding uses for bread that has gone stale in the kitchen preparations, feeding the scraps to the animals kept in the small yard beyond the kitchen, completing the circle of nourishment with the same thoroughness and the same lack of waste that it brings to everything else. A world without waste. A world in which everything has value and nothing is taken for granted, and the daily bread is understood as the gift it actually is. Brother Thomas looks once more at the 4 loaves on the rack. 4 round loaves, cooling in the quiet kitchen, breathing out their warmth into the night air. Tomorrow they will be cut and divided and shared among the community, consumed in silence while words of wisdom move through the room, and the circle of nourishment will continue its turning. Simple, profound, unending. He turns toward the door, and something small and bright catches his eye just for a moment, just in the periphery of his vision. He looks toward the oven. Through the small iron door of the oven's ash chamber, closed but not entirely sealed, a hairline of orange light is visible. The coals inside, banked and sleeping, still burning at their quiet heart. He stands there for a moment, looking at that thin line of orange light. It is a very small light, barely a light at all, and yet it is enough to promise that when morning comes and the oven is needed again, the fire will still be there, requiring only attention, only the addition of new wood, only the simple, faithful act of tending, to rise again into the full warmth that will bake tomorrow's bread. He has always loved this about fire, that it remembers itself, that even banked down to almost nothing, even reduced to a thin orange line in the dark behind a closed iron door, it holds its capacity, holds its essential nature, waiting, patiently and without anxiety, for the moment when it will be called upon again. He steps out of the kitchen. The cool night air of the cloister meets him at the threshold, and behind him, in the warm, dark kitchen, the 4 loaves rest on their rack, and the oven holds its coals, and the honey sits under its wooden lid in its small ceramic pot, and everything waits patient and full and quietly abundant for the morning that is, now not so very far away. The sky is changing, not dramatically, not with any of the theatrical urgency of a sunrise, as it is sometimes depicted all sudden gold and blazing horizon, and birds erupting into chorus simultaneously. The sky changes slowly here, and subtly, and in a way that requires a certain quality of attention to perceive at all, but it is changing. The deep, saturated blue-black of the genuine night hours has begun to thin, at the eastern edge has begun to lighten, very gradually, toward something that is not yet blue and not yet grey, but exists somewhere between the two, a colour that has no precise name because it occupies the borderland between darkness and light, belonging fully to neither. The stars near the horizon are fading, not gone yet, still present, still technically visible, but fading, losing their sharp definition against the brightening sky, the way ink fades when wet, becoming softer at the edges, less insistent in their brightness. Only the highest stars, in the deep zenith of the sky directly overhead, are still fully themselves, still hard and bright and certain, as though the darkness up there has not yet received the news from the horizon. Brother Thomas is in the cloister when he notices this. He has been moving slowly through the pre-Lord's interval, that particular territory of the monastic night that exists between the end of matins and the beginning of the morning office, a territory that has a different quality from any other part of the night. It is not the deep silence of the post-compline hours which carries within it the full weight of the night ahead. It is not the restless, half-dreaming quality of the matins interval when the body and mind are both suspended between sleep and waking. It is something else, something that belongs specifically to this hour, to the gradual approach of dawn, to the particular kind of alertness that comes from having moved through an entire night and arrived at its other edge, a tired alertness, a worn-through, transparent alertness, in which the ordinary filters between a person and their experience are slightly thinner than usual, and things arrive more directly. The cold on his face is very immediate, the stone under his feet is very present, the smell of the frost-near air clean and mineral, and carrying the faint promise of the morning's first light is almost unbearably vivid. He pauses at the east side of the cloister. Here, the arcade faces directly east, and through the stone arches of the cloister walk he can see over the low boundary wall of the kitchen garden to the open fields beyond the monastery's eastern boundary. The fields are dark, still long, flat shapes of harvested earth, the stubble of the autumn crop just visible as a pale texture against the darker soil, and above them, the sky. The sky is doing something quiet and extraordinary. Just breathe here for a moment, my friend. Let your eyes soften. Let the darkness be exactly as dark as it is, and let the approaching light be exactly as faint as it is. Nothing is being rushed. Nothing is being forced. The light is coming in its own time, at its own pace, the way it always has and always will. You're safe here, resting in the beautiful borderland between night and morning. This is the hour that Lauds was designed for. The office of Lauds, from the Latin laudere, to praise, is the morning office, the office that greets the returning light. In the oldest layers of the Christian monastic tradition, Lauds was understood as a response to the resurrection, the return of light after the darkness of the night, as a daily reenactment of the movement from death to life that stood at the centre of the faith. Every morning, in this reading, was Easter morning. Every dawn was the dawn of the first day. Every night's darkness was something that the light had already definitively overcome, and Lauds was the community's daily act of recognition, its daily yes to the returning day, its daily affirmation that the light had come again. The bell rings. It rings from the tower above the church, a deeper bell than the matins bell, or perhaps it simply sounds deeper at this hour, in this thinning darkness, because everything sounds different when the night is ending. It rings with a quality that Brother Thomas has always found different from every other bell in the monastic day. Not the summons of the daytime offices which call the community away from work and back to prayer. Not the gentle closure of compline. The Lord's bell has a quality of announcement, of arrival, of something having been waited for, through the long hours of the dark, finally, faithfully appearing. He moves toward the church. Around him the community is converging again, the same convergence as compline, the same gathering of dark figures moving through the dark cloister toward the church door, but different in quality. At compline, the community gathered from the end of the day full of its hours, weighed with its activities, ready to set everything down. Now the community gathers from the end of the night, emptied of something, or perhaps not emptied but clarified, simplified, reduced to something more essential by the passage of the dark hours, the way a long, slow cooking reduces a liquid to its most concentrated form, not lesser but more itself. Brother Thomas takes his stool. The church is still dark, but differently dark from the darkness of matins. At matins, the darkness felt total, felt like something that would simply continue, felt like the deep middle of a night that had no end in sight. Now the darkness feels temporary, provisional, the darkness of a room whose curtains are about to be drawn still dark, fully dark, but with something behind it that you can sense without yet seeing. One of the younger brothers is lighting additional candles along the choir. He moves along the row of iron stands with a lit taper, touching flame to wick, and each new candle adds its small voice to the gathering light in the church. The light accumulates gradually, not the steady, simultaneous illumination of a modern electric switch, but an additive, progressive warming, one small flame after another, each one a separate decision and a separate contribution to the whole. By the time he reaches the end of the row, the choir is noticeably brighter than it was, and the faces of the monks in their stalls are visible to each other across the aisle. Tired faces, some of them, and peaceful faces, and a few faces that carry an expression he can only describe as the expression of people who have gone far enough into the night that they have come out the other side into something that resembles, in its own quiet way, joy. The office begins. The opening versicle of Lauds is different from Matins. At Matins, the community opened in the darkness with a verse of supplication, "Turn us, O God, and turn away your anger." At Lauds, the opening is different in kind. It is an opening of acknowledgement, of recognition. The Latin is simple and ancient, and worn smooth by centuries of use, like the stones of the cloister walk. Deus in adjutorium meum intend. O God, come to my assistance. And the response, Domine, ad adjuvandum me festina. O Lord, make haste to help me. These words, these specific words, in this specific order, have been used at the beginning of every canonical hour by Christian monks since at least the 6th century, possibly earlier. They come from the Psalms. They are simple to the point of being almost childlike, a direct, unembellished request for help, without elaboration, without argument, without any attempt to demonstrate the worthiness of the person asking. Just, I need help. Please come. Please hurry. What I find quietly extraordinary about this, what moves me every time I think about it, is the consistency. The unbroken chain of human voices across 1,500 years, morning after morning, in monastery after monastery, in Latin and in Greek, and in the desert Aramaic of the first hermits, all saying the same thing to the same darkness as the same light approached from the same eastern horizon. O God, come to my assistance. The Psalms of Lauds are psalms of mourning, of waking, of the particular emotional and spiritual territory of the early hours, the sense of having been sustained through the night, the gratitude for a return to consciousness, the readiness tentative, still, but genuine to take up the day's life again. Psalm 63 is among them. Early will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you, in a dry and weary land where there is no water. Psalm 148, which is among the most beautiful in the entire Psalter, is always sung at Lauds. Praise the Lord from the heavens. Praise him in the heights. Praise him, all his angels. Praise him, all his hosts. The community's voices rise with this one. Not louder exactly, the dynamic range of monastic chant is not wide, is in fact quite deliberately restrained. But there is something in the quality of the sound during Psalm 148 that is different from the sound of matins chanting. Something with more air in it. Something that rises more freely, the way a bird rises more freely when the air warms with the morning. The voices of 22 men, tired voices, most of them, voices that have already been singing for the better part of an hour at matins, and that have been awake since 2 a.m, these voices, singing the praise of creation in a stone church as the sky outside is beginning to lighten, produce a sound that is simply, quietly, heartbreakingly beautiful. Brother Thomas sings. He is not thinking about the words. Precisely, they are too familiar for that, too deeply absorbed into the fabric of his daily experience to be approached as external texts requiring interpretation. He is simply singing them, the way you breathe, the way your heart beats not through effort but through the body's long-trained disposition to do this thing, at this hour, in this place. But underneath the automaticity of the familiar words, something else is moving, something that the night has prepared. The night office, the long arc of the dark hours, from Compline through the great silence, through matins, through the warming room, through the cloister, and the kitchen and the cold eastern sky, all of it has been, in its way, a kind of preparation, a clearing, a slow, patient emptying of whatever accumulates in a person through the activity and noise and social complexity of a day, the small frictions, the unresolved questions, the opinions and preferences and reactions that build up like sediment through the hours of ordinary life. The night, with its silence and its cold and its interrupted sleep and its ancient psalms in the darkness, has been washing that sediment away. Not completely, never completely, but enough. Enough that by the time Lord's arrives and the candles are lit and the choir fills with the sound of morning praise, there is something cleaner at the centre of him, something more open. He sings Psalm 148 and feels it as praise. Not as performance, not as duty, not as the faithful completion of a required task, as actual praise, as the genuine response of a person who has moved through the dark and arrived at the morning and finds, in the fact of the morning's arrival, something truly worth celebrating. The light coming back, the day beginning again, the extraordinary, mundane, endlessly renewable fact of being alive and conscious and present in a world that continues to exist and to offer itself to whoever is willing to receive it with open hands. This is what Lord's is for, not the religious framework. Important as that framework is not the theology of resurrection and daily renewal, true and sustaining as that theology is. Underneath all of that, or perhaps more accurately, woven through all of that, inseparable from it, is something simpler and more universal. The morning is coming, the night has passed, and here you are, still here, still breathing, still capable of lifting your voice in response to a world that has, once again, kept its promise. The canticle of Zechariah the Benedictus brings Lord's toward its close. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has visited and redeemed his people. Brother Thomas's voice moves through the familiar phrases with the ease and warmth of something that has been sung so many times it has become part of the body rather than merely part of the memory. His voice is not remarkable, a middle register, neither deep nor high, carrying no particular beauty as an individual instrument. But at this hour, in this acoustic, in this company, it is exactly right, exactly sufficient, exactly what it needs to be. Outside the east windows of the church, small windows, set high in the wall, their glass thick and slightly greenish in the way of 12th century glass. The sky is unmistakably lighter now. Not light, not yet, but lighter. The darkness has given way to a grey that is not the grey of dull weather, but the grey of something becoming, of something on its way. The specific grey of the world just before colour returns to it, when everything is present but not yet distinguished, not yet separated into its individual hues. The day is coming. The night did its work. Let it have done its work in you too, my friend. Let the long hours of this quiet night have settled something in you. Let the breathing of these stone walls and the warmth of this fire and the cold of this dark garden and the patient scratch of quill on vellum, let all of it have moved through you slowly the way good things move, without force and without urgency, finding their way to wherever they need to go. The final blessing is given. The community is still for a moment, that charged, completed stillness that follows every office, the stillness of something having been faithfully done. Then the movement begins, the gradual, unhurried dispersal, men rising from their stalls, moving toward the doors, some toward the dormitory for the brief interval of sleep before prime, some toward the warming room, some already moving mentally toward the day's first tasks, the mind beginning to gather itself, the body still carrying the looseness and the transparency of the night just past. Brother Thomas rises slowly from his stool. His knees register the cold of the stone floor through his sandals. His back is slightly stiff from the hours of sitting and standing and walking. His eyes are tired, not unpleasantly so, but with the specific tiredness of eyes that have been open longer than usual and that are looking forward, in a genuine and uncomplicated way, to being closed. He stands for a moment in his stall, his hand resting on the familiar wood of the armrest. Outside the east windows, the grey is deepening, which is to say, brightening. The colour is beginning to return, just barely, just the first suggestion of it, a warmth in the grey that is not yet gold, but is the memory of gold, the promise of it, moving through the lightening air like something that has been travelling all night from very far away and has nearly arrived. He lifts his hand from the wood, he turns toward the night stair, and as he crosses the choir floor, the pale stone cool under his sandals, the candles burning at intervals along the aisle, the vigil lamp at the altar steady and faithful, as it has been all night, he carries with him everything the night has given. The silence, the warmth, the bread smell and the honey, the cold stone and the small carved cross, the fire in the warming room and the orange line of coals behind the oven door, the stars above the herb garden and Brother Cuthbert's hands on the elder tree, the voices rising into the darkness at matins and rising again, differently, into the approaching light at Lord's, all of it, held gently, moving with him up the night stair, into the last brief darkness before the morning comes, returning to sleep. The night stair receives him one last time. He climbs it slowly, more slowly than he descended it before matins, more slowly than he climbs it on ordinary evenings before compline. Not because he is weak, not because the cold has stiffened his joints beyond their usual morning stiffness, though it has done that too, a little, but because there is no hurry, because the dormitory is at the top of these stairs and the dormitory contains his mattress and his blanket and the particular blessed quality of warmth and horizontal rest that his body has been, for the last several hours, patiently and uncomplainingly doing without. No hurry. The stone steps rise beneath his feet one at a time, each one cool through his sandals, each one worn in its centre to that gentle hollow that speaks of all the feet that have preceded his up this same ascent. He trails his right hand along the wall as he goes, the gesture he has made descending in the dark, now reversed, now accompanying the upward movement, the returning movement. His fingers read the familiar slight roughness of the limestone, the smooth line of the mortar joint, the place near the top where someone drove an iron hook into the wall long ago for a lamp, perhaps, or a rope, and where the hook is gone. But the slight scar in the stone remains, a small interruption in the wall surface that his fingers have found. Without looking, every single time, he reaches the top. The dormitory door is open, it is always open at this hour. Monks moving through it in ones and twos, finding their mattresses by instinct and by the faint residual light from the east windows, where the sky is continuing its slow and beautiful work of becoming day. The room has its night smell warm wool and straw and the faint mineral exhalation of the walls, and underneath it, something even simpler and more fundamental than that, the smell of rest. Of a room that has been given over to the business of sleep, and that holds the traces of that business in its air the way a bakery holds the traces of bread even when the bread is gone. He moves to his sleeping space, third from the end on the north side, his mattress exactly as he left it, the blanket folded back where he pushed it aside at the matins bell, the straw underneath showing the impression of his body, still faintly warm in the centre where his weight had lain. He looks at this for a moment in the dimness, his own shape, pressed into the straw, waiting for him, patient and entirely undemanding, the way the best things are simply there, simply ready, offering what it has to offer without conditions or complications. He sits on the edge of the mattress, removes his sandals, sets them side by side on the floor with a care that is not fussiness, but simply respect, the same respect he brings to every small physical act of the day, the monk's practice of treating even the most ordinary objects and actions as worthy of attention. The sandals are plain leather, worn and softened with use, the straps darkened by years of handling. He has had them for 6 years. He will have them for more. He removes his belt, his scapular, his cowl, folds each one, and places it on the small shelf above his head, where they will be ready when Prime calls him back to the church in 2 hours. 2 hours. perhaps a little less, a small and finite interval of rest that is not nothing, not nearly nothing, but a genuine and deliberate gift of the rule's wisdom about human limitation. Even monks need sleep. Benedict knew this. Benedict wrote about sleep with the same practical, compassionate intelligence he brought to food and work and every other aspect of the body's needs. The monks should sleep until the 8th hour of the night, he wrote, which in the 6th-century Italian context meant something like 6 or 7 hours adjusted. In practice, for the colder climates and longer nights of northern Europe, adjusted for the specific circumstances of each community, always with the underlying principle intact. The body is not an obstacle. The body is part of the life. It has its needs, and those needs are legitimate, and meeting them is itself a form of faithfulness. He lies down. The straw shifts and settles under his weight, that familiar, slightly lumpy accommodation, the mattress finding the shape of him as it always does, the knot toward the middle that he avoids by sleeping slightly to the left, the pleasant give of the whole thing as his body releases its weight into it. He pulls his blanket up. The wool is thick and immediate in its warmth, moving around him with a generosity that he receives, tonight, with something close to reverence. You're here now, my dear friend, completely here, warm and held and free to let go of everything. The night has done its work. The prayers have been prayed, the silence has been kept, the bread is resting in the kitchen, and the fire is resting in its coals, and the stars are resting toward morning. Everything is resting. You can rest too. You may rest completely. He closes his eyes. The darkness behind his eyelids is warm and immediate, different from the darkness of the church, different from the darkness of the night sky over the herb garden. This is the darkness of the interior, which is the most intimate darkness there is. The darkness of a mind beginning to let go of its own edges, beginning to soften its grip on the careful distinctions this and that, here and there, then and now, that waking consciousness requires, and that sleep, gently and without apology, dissolves. He breathes in. The dormitory air is warm and close and slightly scented, with the wool of his blanket, a smell so familiar it has long since stopped being noticeable, except in moments like this one, when something in the quality of his attention is particularly open. He notices it now, receives it. It is a good smell, a trustworthy smell. The smell of a place where he is known and safe and entirely free to be exactly what he is, a tired man, in the middle of his life, lying on a straw mattress under a wool blanket in a stone building in England, breathing slowly. Nothing more than this. Everything. The sounds of the dormitory settle around him, the small sounds of the other brothers finding their mattresses, lying down, drawing their blankets up. A soft sigh, Brother Anselm. Probably, already deeply settled, already most of the way back into the sleep from which the matins bell roused him. The slight creak of a wooden bed frame somewhere near the far end of the room. The very faint sound of the wind outside the shuttered windows, not strong tonight. Just a breath of it, just enough to make the shutters murmur slightly in their frames. A sound so quiet and so regular, it is almost indistinguishable from silence. His mind drifts. This is the word for it not falling, which implies a sudden loss of control, a gap opening unexpectedly beneath one's feet. Drifting. Moving gradually, by almost imperceptible degrees, away from the shore of waking consciousness toward the open water of sleep. The images that come in this drifting are not quite dreams, not yet, but they have a quality that ordinary thinking lacks. They arrive without invitation and without logical connection. They present themselves briefly and then dissolve, replaced by others with the same unhurried, sourceless quality. The vigil lamp burning in the dark church, the orange line of firelight behind the oven door, Brother Cuthbert's hand on the elder tree, a single star, very bright, very steady, near the zenith of a cold, clear sky, the sound of 22 voices rising in Psalm 148, filling a stone church with praise as the sky outside the east windows moved from dark to grey to the first suggestion of gold. These images come and go. He does not pursue any of them, does not examine or analyze. He receives them the way he receives the smell of the dormitory, the weight of the blanket, the cool stone of the floor just visible at the edge of his vision beneath the hanging fabric of his habit, simply, without commentary, with the open and unpossessive receptiveness of a mind that is laying itself down. This is one of the things the monastic life has given him, that he values most. Not the prayer, though. He values the prayer beyond anything he could easily express. Not the community, though the community has become, over 11 years, the closest thing to family he has known as an adult. Not even the silence, which he loves with a love that is partly sensory, partly intellectual, partly something he has no name for. What he values most, in the quietest and most personal part of himself, is this: the practice of receiving, of being a creature that receives its life rather than one that must perpetually produce it. In the world before the monastery, he was always making, always constructing, building the next thing, planning the next move, creating through constant effort the shape of a life that would justify itself to the world and to himself. There was nothing wrong with that life, nothing bad or misguided about it. It was a perfectly ordinary life, lived by millions of people with perfect legitimacy, but it had a quality of effortfulness that, looking back from here, he recognizes as a kind of exhaustion, a subtle, pervasive, rarely acknowledged exhaustion that came from the constant demand to be the author and the architect of everything. Here, he receives the prayers which were composed before his birth and will continue after his death. He receives the meals prepared by someone else's hands. He receives the warmth of the calefactory, and the cold of the night air, and the sound of the bell, and the shape of the day, and even, in some sense, the particular path that the tradition has made available to him, this ancient, tested, carefully developed path through a human life, worn smooth by the feet of so many before him, offering itself to his own tired feet as a way through the terrain. He didn't make any of it. He just walked into it. And in walking into it, found gradually, imperfectly, with considerable struggle and considerable grace, something that he can only call himself, the self that was there before the making and the constructing and the constant, effortful authorship, the self that simply is, and breathes, and receives, and rests. Rest now, my dear friend. Rest as deeply as you know how. Let the breath move in and out without any management from you. Let the body be heavy and warm and entirely at ease. Let the mind drift wherever it goes. The images are gentle here. The currents are slow and warm. There is nothing in the deep water that will harm you. This is safe water. This is rest. His breathing has slowed, perceptibly slowed. The intervals between his breaths have lengthened. The breaths themselves have deepened. The small muscle effort of each inhalation and exhalation has diminished to almost nothing, the body finding its sleeping rhythm with the ease and the inevitability of water finding its level. The dormitory is very quiet now. All around him, his brothers are doing the same thing he is doing, releasing themselves, 1 degree at a time, into the warm dark of sleep. The room breathes collectively. 22 men, breathing together in the dark, their individual rhythms not quite synchronized but moving in the same general direction toward stillness, toward rest, toward the particular profound democracy of sleep, in which every distinction of age and history and temperament is suspended, and what remains is simply the body, doing what bodies have always done in the dark, breathing, resting, being held. Outside the shuttered windows, the sky continues its transformation. The grey has moved through several of its registers now, from the deep pre-dawn grey to something lighter, something with warmth moving through it, something that is beginning to make the darkness on the eastern side of every stone and building and tree into something that can properly be called a shadow, which requires a light source, which means the light has arrived. Not visibly, yet not inside the shuttered dormitory, where the darkness is still almost complete, but outside on the fields and the meadows and the frost-silvered grass of the cloister garden, the morning is laying itself down gently and without fuss. A few birds have started, not many one, somewhere beyond the orchard wall, testing its voice in the grey air, finding the pitch and the rhythm of the morning's first song. Then a pause. Then another voice, slightly different, slightly further away, responding or simply announcing its own presence in the same brightening world. The birds do not know about Lords, do not know about Compline or the Great Silence or the Night Office, or any of the careful human architecture of the monastic day. They are simply doing what they do, at the time they always do it, with the complete and uncomplicated thoroughness of creatures that live entirely in the present moment of their own nature. Brother Thomas barely hears them. He is at the edge now, that gossamer edge between waking and sleep, where sounds arrive but do not land, where the world is present but not demanding, where the self is still technically conscious but has relinquished its grip on consciousness in a way that feels, from the inside, like nothing so much as grace. One last thought. It is not a precise thought, not a sentence, not a formulated observation, more like a feeling that has taken on just enough shape to be noticed before it dissolves entirely. A feeling of something like, yes. Of something like, this. Of something like the quiet, wordless acknowledgement that the night has been what it was supposed to be, full and faithful and complete in itself, and that the day coming will be what it is supposed to be, and that somewhere in the middle of all of it, in the breathing space between the offices, in the warm dark of the dormitory and the cold light of the cloister, and the amber circle of the scriptorium lamp, in all of it he is exactly where he should be, doing exactly what he should be doing, which is, at this moment, nothing at all, simply breathing, simply resting, simply here. His eyes, already closed, release the last of their tension. The small muscles around them smooth out the almost imperceptible tightness of waking awareness, giving way to the completely different quality of sleep stillness. His hands, resting loosely on the blanket, go heavy. His feet, tucked under the warm wool, are warm and still and entirely at peace. Brother Thomas sleeps, and the monastery holds him, as it has held him every night for 11 years, as it held the monks before him, as it will hold the monks who come after, in this stone building on this English hill, in this deep, intentional, extraordinary quiet. The vigil lamp burns in the church below. The bread rests on its rack in the kitchen. The herb garden breathes its cold, fragrant breath into the lightening air. The carved cross in the corner of the cloister catches the first faint suggestion of morning light, and in the long dormitory, in the warm dark, 22 men breathe together slowly in and out, resting in the life they have chosen, held in the tradition that chose them back, dreaming whatever gentle dreams the morning sends to those who have kept the night faithfully, and now surrender, completely and without reservation, into the gift of sleep, in and out, slow and warm and deep. Rest now, my friend. You've kept the night faithfully too. Deep reflection. Let him sleep. Let Brother Thomas sleep in his stone dormitory with his wool blanket pulled to his chin and the morning light beginning its patient work on the shuttered windows. Let the monastery hold its breath in that particular quality of early morning stillness that exists between the end of Lord's and the beginning of Prime, that small, the generous interval, when the night has been completed and the day has not yet fully claimed its hours. Let the bread rest. Let the coals rest. Let the herb garden receive its first light in silence. We can sit with all of it for a moment, just quietly, just the two of us, here at the edge of this world that is not our own century and not our own life, but that has shown us something tonight. Something worth sitting with before we let it go. I want to talk about what these men gave us. Not in the grand historical sense, not the libraries, though the libraries are extraordinary. Not the architecture, though the architecture is not even the music, though the music of the medieval monastery is one of humanity's most remarkable achievements, a tradition of communal song so deep and so refined that it has never really been surpassed, only diverged from. All of those things are real. All of those things matter enormously. But I want to talk about something quieter than any of them. I want to talk about what the monks understood about rest, because I think this is their most overlooked gift. And I think it may be, for the world we are living in right now, The fast, loud, perpetually connected, relentlessly stimulated world we have built for ourselves, I think it may be the most urgently relevant thing they left behind. You're resting now, my friend, completely, peacefully resting. Let these words move through you slowly, like warm water, like the sound of a single bell. Nothing is required of you. Just breathe, and let the reflection settle gently around you. The monks understood something that our culture has largely forgotten, or perhaps never quite learned, that rest is not the absence of work. It is not simply what happens when work stops. It is not the gap between activities, the empty space between one productive thing and the next. Rest, in the monastic understanding, is itself a thing, a real thing, with its own purpose and its own practice and its own fruits. A thing that must be tended and protected and given proper conditions in which to do its work, because rest, like bread, like honey, like the manuscripts in the scriptorium, does not simply happen. It is made, carefully, deliberately, over time. This is not a new idea. It is in fact one of the oldest ideas in the human record. The Jewish tradition from which Christianity emerged had already enshrined this understanding in its most fundamental law, the Sabbath. 1 day in 7, work stops. Not because the work is done, because the work is never done. Not because rest has been earned, as though rest were a reward for sufficient labour, but simply because rest is necessary. Because the human being is not a machine, is not merely a productive unit, is not adequately described by what it accomplishes or creates or generates. The human being is also a receiver, a rester, a creature made, in part, for stillness, and that part of its nature requires, if it is to remain healthy, regular and deliberate attention. The monks took this understanding and built an entire civilization around it. Not a civilization of pure rest, far from it. The Benedictine life was a life of significant labour. The monastery farmed its land, copied its manuscripts, built its buildings, educated its students, tended its sick, fed its guests, managed its accounts, and conducted its affairs with the full practical engagement that any functioning community requires. Work was not disdained. Work was honoured literally, sanctified, treated as a form of prayer in its own right. Ora et labora, pray and work. The two were not in tension. They were expressions of the same fundamental orientation toward the given world. But the work was structured, bounded, held within a framework that prevented it from consuming everything else. The framework of the hours. 8 times a day, the bell rang, and everything stopped, not because the work was less important than the prayer, but because the work, without the prayer, without the silence, without the regular interruption of deliberate stillness, the work would eventually consume. The worker would hollow them out, would reduce them from a full human being, capable of depth and wonder and genuine presence, to a merely functional one, efficient, perhaps, productive, perhaps, but progressively emptied of the interior life that gives all outer activity its meaning. What I find quietly astonishing, sitting with this tonight, is how clearly the monks saw something that our own era struggles to see at all. They understood, in the 12th century, what modern neuroscience and psychology are only now beginning to confirm, with their own language and their own methods, that the human brain requires periods of genuine rest to consolidate learning, to process experience, to maintain the emotional and cognitive flexibility that makes full human functioning possible. That the default mode network, the system that becomes active when we are not focused on external tasks, the system of daydreaming and inner reflection, and the quiet integration of experience is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is where some of the most important work the mind does happens, invisibly, in the spaces between other things. The monks called this lectio divina, or contemplatio, or simply silence. They had many words for the interior activities that happen in the spaces between, because they had spent centuries paying careful attention to those spaces and developing a nuanced vocabulary for what they found there. They knew that not all rest was the same, that the drowsy half-sleep of the matin's interval was different from the alert, receptive stillness of contemplative prayer, which was different again from the absorbed, almost meditative quiet of manual labour, which was different still from the particular quality of awareness that comes from walking a familiar path in silence while the mind moves freely through its own landscape. They mapped this territory. Generation after generation, in their chronicles and their rules and their spiritual writings and their letters to each other, they mapped the interior territory with a care and a precision that still has no real equivalent in any other tradition I know of. The resulting body of knowledge is one of the extraordinary intellectual achievements of the medieval period, and it is almost entirely about inner experience, about what happens inside a person when they are given the conditions that allow that interior life to unfold. Rest well, my dear friend. These words are not asking anything of you. They are simply keeping you company while you drift. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body be as heavy and as warm as it wants to be. But the monks did not just map this territory for themselves. They shared it. Every monastery in medieval Europe was, by the rule of St. Benedict, obligated to receive guests. No one was to be turned away from the monastery door. The traveller, the pilgrim, the sick person, the stranger arriving without warning or recommendation, the guest was to be received, Benedict wrote, as though he were Christ himself, given food and shelter and rest, given access to the extraordinary thing the monastery had built, the quiet, the rhythm, the quality of life, organized around the interior rather than the exterior. Millions of people, over centuries, passed through monastery doors. Millions of people spent a night or a week in that strange, slow, rhythmically structured world, eating simple food in silence while someone read to them, sleeping in rooms that smelled of beeswax and cold stone, waking to the sound of bells that called a community to prayer in the dark. And many of those people, not all, but many carried something home with them, some residue of what they had encountered, some altered sense of what was possible, when the noise was quieted and the pace was slowed and the interior life was given room. This is not nothing. This is, in fact, one of the most remarkable forms of cultural transmission in human history, not through texts, not through formal education, not through any deliberate program of influence, but through hospitality, through the simple, profound act of welcoming people into a different way of being and letting them experience it in their own bodies, in their own nervous systems, in the specific quality of their own sleep, when it happens in a quiet room with thick walls and no artificial light, and a community of human beings living gently all around them. They gave the world a model, a working, tested, refined, living model of what it looks like when human beings organize their communal life around the interior rather than the exterior, around depth rather than productivity, around the quality of experience rather than the quantity of output, around rest, genuine rest, deliberate rest, rest understood as a practice and a discipline, and a gift, as something at the centre of life rather than at its margin. We have largely lost this model, not entirely. The contemplative traditions are still alive, still practiced, still producing people of remarkable depth and stillness and genuine human presence. But in the wider culture, in the world that most of us inhabit most of the time, the monastic understanding of rest has been progressively marginalized. Rest has become recovery, something you do when the productivity demands it, when the performance requires it, when the body simply will not continue without it. Not something valued for itself, not something practiced with care and attention and the deep understanding that it is where some of the most essential human work is done. What I find most moving about Brother Thomas, lying on his straw mattress in the grey pre-morning light, breathing slowly under his wool blanket, what moves me most is not the romance of it, not the candles or the chanting or the cold stone, or any of the picturesque qualities of the medieval monastery that make it appealing to the modern imagination. What moves me is the simplicity of it. A man resting. In a room made for resting, in a community organized around the understanding that resting is not a failure of ambition or a waste of time, but a form of faithfulness to the body, to the community, to the interior life, to whatever it is in us that requires stillness in order to become itself. That simplicity is the gift, not in any idealized, unreachable form, not as something that requires vows or habits or the entire elaborate structure of medieval monasticism to access. In its most essential form, which is simply this: the deliberate, regular, protected making of space for stillness, the daily decision to stop and breathe and be present and receive and rest. The understanding that this is not the opposite of a full life, but one of its deepest expressions. You carry this in you, my friend. The capacity for this kind of rest, this deep, deliberate, interior rest, is not something that has to be learned from scratch, is not something foreign to human nature. It is, if anything, the most natural thing there is. Children know it instinctively, before the world teaches them to be busy. Very old people often return to it when the demands of the middle years have finally eased. And some people, like the monks in that stone building on that English hill, in that candlelit world, some people build their entire lives around it and spend their days demonstrating, quietly and without urgency, that it is possible, that it is real, that it is here, available, waiting in the stillness between breaths, in the warmth of a wool blanket, in the sound of a single bell dissolving into silence, in the extraordinary, ordinary fact of being alive, in a world that goes on being beautiful regardless of whether anyone is watching it carefully. The monks knew this. And they left it for us, in their walls and their music and their manuscripts, and the worn stripe down the centre of their cloister walkways, not as a relic, not as a museum piece, but as an invitation. Come, be still, rest. It has always been here, and so we leave them. We leave Brother Thomas sleeping in his dormitory, breathing slowly under his wool blanket, his face peaceful in the grey pre-morning light that is finding its way, very gently, through the gaps in the shutters. We leave Brother Anselm deeply, completely asleep, that profound, surrendered sleep of the old, the sleep of a man who has made his peace with everything and asks only to rest. We leave Brother Paul, the young novice, perhaps still half awake, still carrying his bright novice's thoughts, but quieter now, gentler now, the night having done something to the edges of him. We leave Brother Edmund in the scriptorium, though the scriptorium is dark now, the lamps extinguished, the manuscripts closed on their cradles, the smell of ink and vellum slowly cooling in the still air. We leave Brother Cuthbert's herb garden to its morning, the frost on the sage leaves beginning to catch the first pale light, the elder tree standing in its corner of the wall with the patient dignity of something that has been there a long time and intends to be there considerably longer. We leave the kitchen with its 4 round loaves and its banked fire and its small ceramic pot of honey sitting under its wooden lid waiting. We leave the vigil lamp, that small steady flame in the cold church, burning through the night as it has burned through every night in this place for 60 years, faithful and unhurried and entirely itself, asking nothing, offering everything it has, which is a small and sufficient light. We leave it burning. You're safe here, my dear friend, completely, entirely safe. Wherever you are, whatever room, whatever bed, whatever surface is holding you right now, you are held. The way Brother Thomas is held. The way the monastery holds everything within its walls, not tightly, not possessively, but with the patient, generous, completely reliable care of something built thick and true and meant to last. Let the night do its work in you. Let the images from this evening drift through your mind as they will, the candlelight and the cold stone and the psalms rising into the dark, the warming room fire and the 5 men sitting with their hands extended toward the heat, the scratch of the quill and the smell of the vellum, and Brother Edmund's ink-stained fingers moving with their quiet, extraordinary care, the herb garden under the stars, and Brother Cuthbert's hand on the elder tree, and the sage releasing its ancient, warm, unmistakable smell into the cold night air. Let them drift. Don't hold any of them. Don't examine them or turn them over or try to keep them. Let them move through the way the Matins chant moved through the stone church, filling the space briefly, beautifully, and then dissolving into the silence that was always there beneath it, waiting to receive it. The silence is still there. It is still there in the monastery, where 22 men are sleeping and the morning is arriving on its own quiet schedule. It is still there in the herb garden and the kitchen and the scriptorium and the long stone cloister where Brother Thomas walked his circuits in the dark. It is still there in the church, around the vigil lamp, in the carved wooden choir stalls and the pale limestone walls, and the high dark ceiling that absorbed all that singing and is holding it still, the way stone holds warmth, and it is here, right here, in the room you are in the air around you, in the space between one breath and the next, the same silence. The same deep, patient, entirely welcoming silence that the monks built their lives around. It was never far away. It never is. You have been travelling tonight. You went somewhere real, or as real as history and imagination together can make a place, which I think is quite real indeed. You walked barefoot on cold flagstones. You heard a bell dissolve into the dark. You sat by a fire at 2 a.m. with your hands extended toward the warmth, in the company of quiet, good people. You walked in a garden under stars so numerous and so bright they would take your breath away. You sang, in your own quiet way, with 22 voices rising in a cold stone church as the sky outside the east windows began its slow transformation from dark to grey to the first suggestion of gold. That was real. You were there, and now you are here, warm and still and held, and drifting toward the deep water of sleep in the way that the monks drifted toward it every night in their dormitory, without force, without urgency, with the simple, complete willingness of a person who has done enough, and been present enough, and given enough of the day's hours to the day's work, and is now finally, gratefully, entirely ready to rest. Let your breath slow just a little more. Let your body settle just a fraction, deeper into whatever is beneath you. Let the images from this monastery night dissolve into warmth, into darkness, into the quiet current that will carry you, gently and faithfully, all the way down. You have kept the night well, my friend. Sleep now. Sleep as Brother Thomas sleeps deeply, and without reservation, and with the quiet knowledge that the morning will come when it comes, and the bell will ring when it rings, and the bread will be ready, and the fire will be ready, and the psalms will be ready, and the world will be exactly what it is, full of its ordinary, extraordinary gifts, waiting with perfect patience for the moment when you open your eyes and receive it again. But not yet, not yet. For now, for this moment, and the next, and the long, gentle string of moments that leads all the way down to the deepest and most restful sleep, for now there is only this: the warmth, the dark, the breathing, the silence, wide and welcoming and deep as the night sky above, an English monastery, full of stars beyond counting, holding everything in its enormous and unhurried arms. Good night, my dear friend. Good night. And if you found yourself tonight in that candlelit world, if something in the cold stone and the quiet chanting and the slow, deliberate rhythm of those extraordinary lives reached something in you, then come back. There is so much more. Next time, we are going to walk the medieval pilgrim road. We are going to join a small group of quiet travellers, tradespeople and farmers, and one very elderly woman who has been saving for this journey her entire life, as they make their slow, footsore, deeply human way through the English countryside toward a distant shrine. We will sleep in pilgrim hostels that smell of wood smoke and damp wool. We will feel the chalk road under our feet and the autumn wind on our faces and the extraordinary companionship of strangers walking together towards something they cannot entirely explain. The road is waiting. I will meet you there. This is Sleepy History with Alan. Thank you, as always, for resting here with me.